Hello there, and welcome to episode 9 of Trek Prime. We're almost on episode 10. I'm really happy we made it that far, and there's been some interesting subjects tackled. And now today, we're going to be tackling a subject that, I've been thinking about, and I'm glad you brought it up. As I told you yesterday, we talked on Twitter, because it's not only a rabbit hole, but it was a little uncomfortable for me because of the idea that it represents in our real life. But the subject matter we're going to be discussing is the Third World War as it exists in the Star Trek universe. You wanted to make sure we define that very well.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, it's an abstraction in our world. And basically, as I told you yesterday, it always refers to the end of humanity.
Yeah.
But in the Star Trek universe, it took a very interesting turn because we noticed that Star Trek is a world of people on Earth who are definitely not obvious genetic mutations. So, but let's just start with a framework you wanted to give it, a theory you had about this Third World War, which happened in the 21st century, but I wanted to hear your theory about this that you were discussing.
Okay, well, first I just wanted to point out that I guess initially when Roddenberry had wanted to make that a part of the Star Trek timeline story back in the TOS era, they would always refer to the World War III era. You have to understand Roddenberry was part of the World War II generation, and back in those days, people really didn't understand the details and the severity of what nuclear weapons could do.
Right, exactly. They were.
So I think, without much thought, he put it in there, but I don't think he realized, how significant such a exchange of weaponry would be.
Yeah. That was the duck and cover days,
That's right. Of course, later on,
over your head and stuff. Yeah.
It wasn't until like the late 70s, early 80s, I think, when people started to smarten up about what those things can do.
Right, because they put out those videos from Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the 70s and stuff like that.
And of course, scientists, were starting to give people information about it, like all the fallout and all the stuff and that.
Right.
So after a while, people started to say, well, geez, how could humanity survive World War III? And that always stuck in my mind as I was always watching Star Trek and then Star Trek Next Generation, when they'd always talk about World War III and they would add a little bit more into the World War III. This happened, this happened, this happened. And I keep wondering, how could all these things happen when, you think the Earth has got to be full of radiation, the water's contaminated, the air's contaminated, the soil's contaminated, the animals are dying. How could it be possible that, humanity could have survived all that and still kept rebuilding the world and achieving scientific things? Because during the Star Trek's timeline, where the World War III lasted almost 30 years. Okay, but in that 30-year period, you had a manned mission to Mars that happened at the sort of the start of the war, and
right.
Then they had a ship that left the solar system in 2037. Okay, so
was that the one with Captain Christopher's son on it, the one that went to Saturn?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was. The first one went to Mars, and then they had a ship that was trying to leave the solar system. The first ship to leave the solar system. I don't know what happened to it. I don't know if there was an episode.
Was that Friendship 1?
It was the Starship Charbis.
The Charybdis. Yeah, that was the one from the Royale.
Okay, yeah, it might have been. I can't remember.
Yeah, the NASA ship. Yeah, wasn't it NASA?
Yeah. So apparently, it got lost.
Charybdis, yeah.
Yeah, I got lost after it left the solar system, I guess. But that to me tells me that things are still going on. So my theory is World War III. It might have lasted about 30 years in the Star Trek timeline, but that doesn't mean at the very beginning of that war it was used. They used nuclear weapons. I think what happened was the war started with conventional weaponry, probably with a couple of countries, one fighting the other. And they said that there was Ireland, I guess it was, they had some terrorist activity that happened in Ireland, and they unified or something like that.
Yeah, the Irish reunification.
Yeah, and it was in the episode The High Ground where they mentioned that.
Yes.
So that was just 2 years before World War III started. So that means there was some unrest going on, and then they created the new United Nations. That happened the same year World War III started. So I'm thinking something politically triggered this thing. And it probably started, like I said, with some smaller countries just, bringing their tanks in, their regular bombs, troops, stuff like that. And it wasn't fought with nuclear weapons. And I think that's how it started. And like a lot of wars, it starts off small, like it happened in World War II. And then all of a sudden you've got all these other bigger countries getting into it. And then they start bringing in all their super firepower and stuff. So I think in the beginning, the World War III started as probably not so much a world war as it was just, one country fighting another. And then it started to bring in their allies. And then by the middle of that period, it was probably fought with tactical nukes, chemical war bombs, stuff like that. And then at the very end, ICBMs were thrown at each other from bigger countries. And then all of a sudden it stopped because it wasn't an all-out war. It ended, quickly, but it still left a lot of cities destroyed. It left 600 million dead, as Riker had indicated in Star Trek First Contact, even though Spock had
37 million, yeah. So the death toll varies, and depending on what you're talking about, that's another story.
So I'm more inclined to think that it would be like what Riker was saying, that 600 million sounds a lot more feasible than 37 million, because when you're talking nuclear weapons, you're talking big losses in population. So I'm thinking that, it became a nuclear war, and then it stopped. I think finally they managed to stop it. A ceasefire was declared, but it still left the world pretty devastated. There was probably pockets of the planet that were completely irradiated, and they just couldn't have anybody there. I think that some spots, like where we find Zephyr and Cochrane in First Contact, would have been safe because it's virtually nowhere. There's nothing there of any value to hit, except for that one missile site, but apparently it got spared before they could actually hit all the military targets. So I'm thinking that, it left the door open that there was a possibility that humanity might have been able to come up with some kind of a medicine, maybe, like what you said last night, that they probably had some kind of drug that they come out with to help radiation poisoning.
I wanted to interject something that went right with that, if you don't mind. I don't want you to lose your train of thought, though.
Okay.
In a TNG episode called Thine Own Self, Data was on this pre-industrial planet. He was collecting this radioactive material from a satellite. Yeah. And what he did is, he didn't know who he was. He brought it into this town, and he naively gave the metal to local blacksmiths to sell as jewelry. And all they knew was it felt slightly warm, but people started to get radiation sickness. And he came up with a liquid compound that was showing signs of treating one of these people in this area, and he put it in the water supply for this village, and even in a diluted form, it cured everybody of radiation poisoning.
Yeah.
So, that could be something from that time period, but you've got to wonder if that wasn't something that had come around, like you said, after this tactical nuclear exchange, or if it had already been there beforehand and they just used it during that time.
Yeah.
There's a possibility. Go on.
So, we could say that, at some point early on, they probably figured out how to cure that radiation sickness. I think even in the TOS era, remember that episode where they were getting old, Kirk, Spock, and
the Deadly Years, yeah.
Yeah, and then McCoy had something called adrenaline that was supposed to reverse the radiation sickness they got. Remember, he injected Kirk with it, and it made him young again. And I think they said something about that drug was created somewhere in that same period too. So it's possible there were two drugs that they created that might have fought radiation. But what they say, when you're in desperate times, people will focus on getting things done. So
it could have happened during that time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even today, we're fighting cancers and stuff. We got radiation around the planet. You got Chernobyl, you got Fukushima.
Right, exactly.
And there's not a real big panic about, we got to find a way to fight the radiation. It's like everybody knows about it and they're not really thinking about it. But, if you're in a war situation and you're seeing populations blown up, people will start to focus their energy and their resources into finding some way to help, to save lives. And I think that was the catalyst that created these drugs that you mentioned that Data created, and the one that Dr. McCoy suddenly remembered,
right.
And so that's I think that's, that makes more sense than just saying, oh, well, World War III happened, it was a big exchange, and it was over in a flash. Now, that wouldn't happen that way because there would be nothing left.
There's a history there. I mean, there's definitely a history.
Yeah.
So,
if it lasted 30 years, that's a big chunk of Trek history right there.
so yeah, was that your basic theory about what the framework of that was, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I just, because I always thought, when they would mention that, like, how could there be, any life afterwards? Because we in the early 80s, everybody always thought that a nuclear war would involve an all-out release of all weapons from both sides that would devastate the world. I mean, remember that movie The Day After, and they show, what happened to Oklahoma City? I mean, that was pretty scary.
Yeah, no kidding.
So that's how we were brought up in the 80s to think that's how a nuclear war would be.
Well, right, and like I said, I was a little kid in the 80s, so that was like the monster under my bed.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't initiate this subject. It was like a little weird, but,
it was an eye-opener that needed to be talked about. I mean, like, this is what could happen. If we did this is what's going to happen. And it did wake up some people.
Right, exactly. And that's why World War III to me always was another word for the end of the world. It always kind of came out that way.
Yeah.
In Star Trek, like we were saying, it wasn't so much that. But, as you implied, I guess you got to kind of remove yourself from the fact that whole thing with World War III happened at least 100 years before NXL-1.
Yeah, at least that, yeah.
So, I mean, whatever happened, 100 years is a long time to really do. And I mean, like I said, anyway, go on, because there's a lot in here that could be.
Well, yeah, I mean, and like you said, it was 100 years, so there was a lot of work done. I mean, people will say, well, how is it possible in 100 years you can take a devastated planet and make it into this paradise? Well, look what happened after World War II. Look at how England looked after, it was bombed to hell, and Germany. I mean, you can still go in places in the world today and find some leftover buildings that were smashed during World War II. But for the most part, the world recovered. The cities are bigger now than they were then. There's more population living there now, and that was less than 100 years. Humanity managed to rebuild all of that. And you go over to Japan and you see where Hiroshima. It looks like a brand new city.
Exactly, but there's still a few signs. A tree here and there. The Jimbuka Dome.
And it surprises the hell out of me because you think, there'd be radiation there, but nope, they're still there. I mean, you got people walking around the city.
It may seem weird to me, but I really, when I was trying to deal with this issue I had that I mentioned to you about that being monster under my bed, I don't want to get too far off topic, but maybe this is topic. I did watch a movie, I don't know if you've heard about it, called Barefoot Gen. It's anime. A very Speed Racer kind of anime.
I never saw it. No.
It attempts to animate what happened to people that day. It could be to the point of being unwatchable, but it's a true-to-life account of a young boy, basically the guy who did it, who was from Hiroshima, who talked about what happened during those years. And it basically went into the fact that the bomb that hit Hiroshima was an airburst. And a very small weapon compared to what we have now. And now you got to think about now versus whatever they might have had. Now, the nuclear weapons launched during World War III in the Star Trek universe, I don't know if there would be ones from the 20th century or newer ones from that time. I don't know.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be much different than what we got now. Yeah.
Because like I said, it could be... Because remember, when Zefram Cochrane took his first warp flight, it was on an old Titan missile.
Yeah.
Technology that by that time would have been well over 100 years old.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So he's using very old technology.
Yeah. He just stripped it down, and put parts in it that he needed. So that's basically how he did it.
But anyway, is there anything you wanted to specifically add to your thing? Because this is opening up that whole thing,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So basically that's what I'm just saying is I wanted to say, how could it be possible? And so if you logically think about it, that it can be possible, especially when they've already indicated that they found some cures for radiation sickness in the film.
Actually, I'm going to go to Memory Alpha for this video, and I want to give you all a little credit, Memory Alpha, so nobody gets upset about me not giving credit. But, I think that I have one theory about the outcome of World War III myself.
Okay.
I think maybe Roddenberry conceived World War III rather than being the end of the world, because he would often say, there is a tomorrow, it's not going to end with a big flash and a bomb. He didn't necessarily say there wouldn't be one.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we all hope it won't have to happen that way, but, because it already has. But I'm just saying that, I think that he conceded to the fact that, in a way, that might be, at that time, the only thing that would force everybody in the world to build a spaceship Earth.
Yeah.
Again, like you said, with that 60s naivety, not thinking about, like I said, you got to wonder, people making these new Star Treks now, if they're trying to make them realistic, why they aren't populating the ship with mutants and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a grim idea, but that wasn't what Roddenberry had in mind. So obviously, I feel that he must have figured that, okay, there was a nuclear exchange of some kind or another. He may not have conceived World War III in his eyes as a nuclear exchange.
Yeah.
I mean, as a matter of fact, I never actually heard an official, in real life, idea that World War III was going to be, per se, nuclear. I think it just goes back to the idea that, this fervor of the times that nuclear weapons would make present-day naval things obsolete.
Yeah.
But, like I said, we've had wars since World War II, since the advent of atomic power, that have not been nuclear. There's been depleted weapons, stuff like that, but, they didn't nuke Iraq or anything like that. So perhaps that's changed. But, and now they have these thermobaric weapons that do the same damage, but they don't create radiation.
Yeah.
Nobody's really thinking of using neutron bombs so much anymore or anything like that. So, but like I said, in his 60s mind frame, being a World War II guy, as you said, and it could have been different. So I'm going to go to Memory Alpha, and I'm going to put some history in there that kind of goes with what you're saying. And there's some similarities there. Apparently, and I noticed Spock did this in Space Seed, he mentioned to Bones, the 1990s were the period of your last so-called World War, in which Bones corrected him as saying the eugenics wars. So I always kind of assumed they were kind of separate things.
Yeah, they are, as far as I know, in the timeline.
But it turns out, according to Memory Alpha, they're actually not. And I'll explain to you.
Okay. I always thought that was in the 90s.
Apparently, to cite what it says there, after the from the ashes of the eugenics wars, the era of World War III was a period of global conflict on Earth that escalated into a nuclear cataclysm and a genocidal war over issues including genetic manipulation and the human genome enhancement. So apparently, the eugenics wars issues, if this timeline is correct, on Memory Alpha, didn't go away.
So it lasted right up until that point, yeah.
And apparently, here's the timeline for World War III. It lasted from around 2026 to 2053. That's the timeline they give it.
Okay.
Which would be about 30 years or so.
About. So you're saying the eugenics wars played a role into that World War III timeline, and, basically...
I mean, if you look at geopolitical history in our real world, the First World War, in a way, played a role in the second one, because Germany was defeated in World War I, right? The society was basically economically destroyed, and that gave rise to the Brown Shirts and the Nazi Party, which initiated World War II.
Yep.
And then allies with Imperial Japan, and that all came into it. And, of course, since World War I also resulted in the creation of the Soviet Union.
Yep.
So, you had World War I influencing, and in World War II, the Soviet Union were the allies of this nation.
Yeah.
And the Nazis, so the Soviet Union and the Nazi Party were both direct results of the First World War, instigated the Second. So if you look at, maybe that's why Spock logically mistaken the eugenics wars for World War III, because the issues that and of course they put that little trope in there about things being fragmentary, which that can be dicey, but it might make sense if there was a cataclysm. I mean, like I said, I suppose there are things from World War I and II that just aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, some note that somebody had in a ship that got sunk or something. Anyway, so basically, there's that Memory Alpha used the Riker estimate, 600 million, which, as you said, might be more accurate.
Yeah.
And apparently, in several episodes, including First Contact, many of the planet's major cities and governments had been destroyed.
Yeah.
So, I wonder, San Francisco being a naval base, the Golden Gate Bridge and everything is still there.
Yeah, so it was probably one of the cities that got spared,
I just find it weird that, and like we've never seen 24th century New York or Boston.
No, it's true. I mean, maybe Washington was wiped out, and so the chain of power went to San Francisco.
That might have been what happened. D.C. might have been a first strike target in the nuclear cataclysm. But like I said, World War III led to other events as well, because
remember they was talking about the Eastern Coalition. I mean, is there something in there in Memory Alpha about that? Because I remember
yes, that's what I was about to go into.
Okay.
Because it's a long history. World War III was apparently fought in an era where various factions were known to control their military with narcotics, which we talked about the other day too. And they mentioned that in Encounter at Farpoint. These people who dressed in what looked like these rubber outfits who were putting something up their nose, some sort of, like the Jem'Hadar almost,
Yeah.
Because the Jem'Hadar were controlled the same way, through a narcotic called Ketracel White. So, and I wonder why they didn't mention the World War III super soldiers, which are basically the human version of Jem'Hadar.
Yeah.
It was a similar thing. And so anyway, they were talking about one of the parties was the Eastern Coalition, which were referred to as Econ. If you remember First Contact, Zephram Cochrane's assistant, I believe her name was Lily Sloan, which was played by Alfred Woodard. She mentioned that she thought that what turned out to be the Borg ship was an Econ scout.
Yeah.
And he said there hadn't been Econ scouts in a while. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, brings us to the start of the war in 2026, because they mentioned a character named Colonel Philip Green. Okay, you remember Colonel Green from the episode The Savage Curtain?
Yeah. That was a weird episode with Abraham Lincoln and
with Serac and this other alien bad
rock creature.
Right. And anyway, so and Kalos was in that too. So but anyway, Colonel Green was there, and he was kind of this treacherous character, but they described him as leading a faction of eco-terrorists.
Yeah.
That were responsible, and this is where it gets interesting, that Colonel Green and his group of eco-terrorists were responsible for 37 million people getting killed. And they citate bread and circuses. So apparently that 37 million should have been framed as the initial battle cry of World War III.
Yeah.
Because Colonel Green apparently in his eco-terrorist group. Now let me see if I can get more information on, I'm sorry, it's Colonel Philip Green now. I didn't realize he had a first name, but anyway. He's a despotic militia leader. Apparently known for overwhelming and devastating his enemies, and he ordered euthanasia of hundreds and hundreds of radiation-sickened humans so they would not pass on mutations to future generations. And so that might explain why we didn't see mutations. And I should bring up another thing. If you remember on Voyager, they had a probe, a space probe, that went to Mars, like you said, called Ares. I think it was called Ares 4. And that was in 2032, right during the Second World War, right after Colonel Green had done his thing.
Yeah.
So apparently there were still explorations. There probably were some early lunar colonies by then. So I don't know if that World War III spread into space. So it's possible Martian and lunar colonists were spared.
Yeah.
So that brings me to a theory. What if during the Third World War, there was a period after that, which could, I suppose, be its own video, but it applies here, called the post-atomic horror, where the governments have been reduced down, and in certain parts of the world, encounter a far point, it looked like Southeast Asia to me, maybe China. They had these insane Mad Maxy kangaroo courts.
Yeah.
They had one figure, judge, jury, everything.
Yeah.
And where I guess they agreed with Shakespeare saying kill all the lawyers. So everybody was guilty until proven innocent, where basically there was no law.
Yeah.
And David said that was an accurate recreation. I don't know if Q in that outfit floating out on that chair was something they had. I don't know if that was a instant thing. Yeah. But they had that kangaroo court system. Mm-hmm. And, I think during that time there's a possibility in all that disorder, maybe some planetary colonists not affected by this had developed cures for radiation off-world. And maybe they brought that to Earth. I mean, you remember on Star Trek they have a technology that can make water out of air.
Yeah.
What if they had a treatment for radiation for people, and it could become an airborne thing that could diminish it in the atmosphere? I just figured that might have been it. And I'm sure, once the first contact with aliens happened, I'm sure the Vulcans help with the rest.
Yeah, I mean, since it's canon now, we have to assume the Vulcans probably helped in some way to rebuild the Earth.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go by Enterprise rules, I can't see the Vulcans saying, well, we're going to give you some anti-radiation technology, but hold back a little bit till you're ready.
Yeah, I mean,
that was the Enterprise MO with the starships.
I just have a hard time with the idea that Vulcans are helping humans travel and just, because it kind of takes away from Roddenberry's.
Yeah, that's a bit dicey, that whole thing. Yeah, but as far as helping Earth deal with its crisis, they may have.
Yeah.
They may have helped with some things. The idea of an interplanetary exchange was good, but I don't think Earth per se needed Vulcan guidance. But then again, they really didn't. They ended up doing a lot of it themselves anyway without Vulcans' help. So the Vulcans were just interlopers who nobody wanted around, I guess. But not to get too far off subject, that could be a possibility. You mentioned something that could have also helped, but it wasn't really related to Prime Canon, so I'm not going to look at it. That was...
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to look at that, but, remember, we haven't seen all of Earth. Let's see, what have we seen of Earth in Star Trek in the future? We've seen San Francisco a lot. Mm-hmm. We saw Paris. Did we see Paris a couple of times?
Yeah.
We saw New Orleans. New Orleans is obviously intact.
Yeah, New Orleans, that's still...
And New Orleans doesn't look that different. And then when Bones went to Earth with them in Star Trek 4, he looked at 1986 San Francisco. He said it doesn't look all that different.
Yeah. So it was relatively untouched, I would think, yeah.
So like I said, and one thing you notice about these Star Trek wars, and I find this, maybe it's because it's written by an American guy, a lot of these Star Trek wars seem to take place in remote corners of the world.
Yeah.
The eugenics wars seem to be confined to certain parts of Asia and India.
Well, I don't know if you see it on Memory Alpha, but they said something about the eugenics wars was kind of fought in secret. And
because of the books and everything, and because it didn't happen, obviously.
I want to know that there are these dictators rising up all over the planet that were trying to take over the world. Like, that could be all done in secret as long as the media keeps out of it. Like, it's like...
Yeah, there was always a play on conspiracy theories,
I know, one of those big ones, yeah.
Because, I didn't read the con books. I'm assuming you're referring to the con books.
Yeah, yeah.
Because their whole thing is that they end up linking... And I'm going to go into this because this relates to World War III. They ended up linking Gary Seven, who's a big character. If you look on Memory Alpha, Gary Seven apparently did everything in that time. Everything weird, Gary Seven did it. That's just kind of how they do it. And that Roberta Lincoln character. So they're kind of like the Doctor Who and his companions, sort of preventing things passively, I guess. Yeah. The alien and female assistant who has... like a sonic screwdriver and a TARDIS, but they're not saying it. Yeah, I think Gary Seven is Star Trek's Doctor Who. That's how I feel. He's kind of a Doctor Who. But anyway, Doctor Who's just the name of a show. But anyway, kind of a Time Lord type figure. But I think that with that whole thing, the con books link that somehow Edith Keeler.
Didn't they write 3 novels about that?
Yeah, Khan's youth, his rise to power, and the years on SETI Alpha 5.
Yeah, and then they put Gary Seven in there to show
right in the beginning. Khan the trilogy.
yeah, he knew Khan, he stuff like that.
And basically, that the Botany Bay is a ship made with some sort of repurposed alien technology.
Yeah, yeah.
Basically, it gets very Jaws 3D in the sense it gets kind of murky.
Yeah, I read them, but I didn't like the idea because they remember the TV show The Equalizer. Just because the same actor was in that played Gary Seven was in that show, they
Robert Lansing.
Yeah, they decided to bring The Equalizer into the mix. Like, oh well, The Equalizer is part of the Star Trek timeline too. It's like,
That's what it was. On. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because they wanted to make the Gary Seven show the Star Trek spin-off.
Yeah, that's right. I remember.
So they put this little weird cartoon line with Spock saying, "I'll ascertain that Gary and that Roberta Lincoln will have many adventures."
Yeah, I guess.
And poof, they're over. Because they're not going to spin off from a show that's not that successful. So that was just a weird thing we never heard about. It was supposed to be like season 1 of their little show, but
they never gave it a chance. I mean, they just they introduced these characters and then they never did a follow-up.
Right, and it wasn't that it wasn't interesting, but I've heard of The Equalizer, but now that you say it, I think maybe they were just bringing Robert Lansing's character from that show and kind of Star Trek-izing him a little bit.
Yeah, because he was such a mysterious guy in The Equalizer, they figure, well, he would fit in with the Gary, with him, and they could just say it was the same character that years later he was working with this old man there that's going around.
Yeah. And by the way, Gary Seven's not a tangent because apparently what he did affected the eugenics wars in World War III. He did stop an A-bomb from crashing on Earth by accident. So
yeah,
I guess I got to give him credit for that. Even though Gary Seven is this kind of one-shot mysterious hero we never hear from again.
Yeah,
and there could be like 100 episodes involving him. And,
yeah, I mean, after all these years, you think somebody would have done a follow-up episode on the planet that he came from, or something?
Yeah, and he said, even in your time, he won't be known.
Yeah.
But in Picard's time, maybe no.
Maybe, yeah, could be.
Maybe he's from Tau Alpha C.
Yeah. Oh man, we'll bring that in there.
The Traveler, and he gave us some Tau Alpha C, and he can phase and stuff like that. He's human, but he's raised by the Traveler or something.
Here we go with the Traveler again.
Yeah, the Traveler is the next generation's Gary Seven. He's responsible for everything.
Yeah, I know he's everywhere.
And Q, of course. If something weird happens, Q or Traveler did it.
Yeah.
Play with space like it's a toy. And, Trey is the remedial omnipotent entity, I guess. That's what he is. But anyway, the thing is, or the old, young, undisciplined one. But anyway, that was a bit of a digression. But, I don't know, putting Gary Seven in there in World War III, it just unbalances things a little bit. But they did, so that's just that's novel. That's not canon either, so.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to take that tangent, I was debating last night with you, as you know, well, I'm debating, but talking about worrying if the subject would be too serious-minded. But I guess when you bring up the absurdity of how Gary Seven was bought into it, it gets absurd to humor.
We're talking about, World War III in the context of Star Trek. I mean, it's serious, but at the same time, you got...
Well, yeah, because you know that the outcome was obviously very good.
Yeah, because it all ends up working out.
Almost, I wouldn't say perfect, but pretty close to it. I mean, they live in a world that we're having a hard time conceiving. Maybe not though.
Right now, all that's being made is grim movies. This post-apocalypse, post-apocalypse.
Yes, I wanted to bring that up. That kind of goes with this too, because if you look back at cinema, World War I was the beginning of the silent era. And then the talkies came along after the war, basically, in the late 20s. So you had that 30s period, the 10-year period with the talkies. And if you look at war movies of that time, people who fought wars, there were bloody things that happened, people got killed, but the Americans always won. They never lost, really.
Yeah.
I mean, well, they may have, I don't know in the old war movies if there was one where they didn't, but we certainly didn't see much of it. They were always the big heroes.
That's right.
And then after World War II, every American was assumed to be a hero. So, everything was just romanticized in a huge way.
Yeah.
It just got so big. And I remember in Star Trek Enterprise, when Archer returned to Earth in an episode called Home, it was the one where Dr. Phlox did the big lizard face thing.
Yeah.
He was talking to the future captain of the Columbia. I think it was Joanne Cassidy. Remember her? In that?
I can't remember her name now, but yeah.
Joanne Cassidy, Roger Rabbit. Anyway, so she was in that, and he was talking to her about seen any good movies lately? And she said, oh, well, there's another World War III epic.
Yeah.
So apparently they're writing these big epics about this. And, when you mention that, this is a big aside. But, I'm thinking, I turn on my Netflix, I look at the latest movies coming on, and it's very on Star Trek. Right now, sci-fi is in its dystopian phase.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of the guy, but I'm trying to think. You'll know him if I say this. In a world where blank. You know what I'm talking. The movie trailer guy. I forget he died.
Oh, you're talking.
Always put that in it.
Yeah. Okay.
He was a great announcer, but he kind of became a joke for he inserted that into every trailer he did.
Yeah.
In a world where Monchi Cheese eats Snorks or whatever. Whatever it is, I just mixed two weird franchises. But I mean, everything's in a world. I mean, could you imagine if it started with that way? In a world where utopia has happened, there is this. I mean, now it's the in a world era.
Yeah.
Where the world you're in is not a hopeful one. And, I mean, I think Gene Roddenberry, with World War III and with his impression of it, wanted to show that humanity had a future, right? And, I think since the 60s, society's impression of the future has gone from a hopeful one, I'm trying to think, to more of a realistic one. And if you become too much of a realist, you enter the little world of cynicism, where you think the future cannot possibly be hopeful.
Yeah.
Which is pretty close-minded. I mean, it's kind of living in ignorance, to be honest with you. It's living in ignorance to not have any hope. I mean, look at us. You think about the times we've lived through. There have been about 20 times in my lifetime where I was told we're not going to make it to next year. And that happened a couple years ago. And here we are.
Yeah.
So, for all I know, maybe Gene Roddenberry's right. Maybe some Star Trek-like thing is possible in the future. And I think the way he conceived World War III kind of went with that, because he always said, it's not going to end with a big flash and a bomb. You've heard that, right? Again, he didn't say there wouldn't be one. He just and I realized that years later, but he's saying that it's not going to end with it. That humanity has this resilience where it just kind of goes on. And like I said, if you look at the Star Trek world, in today's world, I think the Star Trek characters, they aren't very realistic to our world because they've been generations ahead of things that we haven't conceived of yet.
Yeah.
And I mean, that Third World War could have been a shock to the system that initiated things that should have happened. There's an episode of Deep Space Nine I think I've referenced that happened just post World War III, and it's called Past Tense. Sisko and Bashir go to this San Francisco where basically people are being put into forced encampments. I think they're called sanctuary districts. And actually there's a World War III reference in there. They talk about something called the Neo-Transcendentalist movement occurring over in Europe, and Europe falling apart. And that brings me to another topic I wanted to bring up about World War III. After the post-atomic horror, that apparently extended in the 22nd century, right? Early 22nd century?
Yeah.
The 2100s, 10s. There was a figure in an episode of Star Trek TNG called Up the Long Ladder, which is not one of the most beloved episodes for some reason. I actually really like it. I mean, it's not The Naked Now or anything, but anyway, they were talking about, there was this man, somehow I have a feeling he's Irish, named Liam Deegan.
Yeah.
I guess the name just was a big giveaway, maybe. But who was a founder of this neo-transcendentalist movement, and it had to do with basically a back to the land movement where people lived more in tune with nature.
Yeah.
And in Up the Long Ladder, it manifested itself as this colony ship of sophisticated people, presumably from the post-atomic era, on this Mariposa, which is a sleeper ship, and this other group of people who looked like 18th century farm people.
That's right.
I'm assuming they were part of this neo-transcendentalist movement that, an agrarian existence. So, and in this time, there must have been Vulcans on Earth. So maybe the first Vulcan compounds. So basically, I just think that after World War III, just the whole layout of the world changed. They were trying to rebuild society from this cataclysm. They were rebuilding the governments, and there was that thing that came from that called the European hegemony, in which the European nations came together and began starting a world government. So somewhere in the 22nd century, humanity started to apparently completely reframe nationalism, capitalism, culture. Everything got reframed.
And you had like the United States of Africa.
Right, because the nations started to unite across the world. You had the European hegemony. I imagine the United States of Africa came along during that period.
Yeah.
I have this impression from what Kirk said in TOS that the United States survived as a structure.
Yeah, like a North American
continent. Because he was born in Iowa, so it was still in Iowa. The state still existed, and there were 52 of them at some point. Yeah. So what happened is, I think a lot of these countries that had separate states, maybe South America became a southern United States, maybe. Mm-hmm. Europe became a kind of a hegemony. There was implications. Australia was almost a holdout from this process.
Yeah, they were like the last ones to come into the thing. Yeah.
And there was a unified world government, which I assume was called United Earth.
Yeah.
And, because, now we have all these overly complicated notions about globalism and stuff all involved in our current understanding. But, like I said, in that time, we're redefining everything.
Yeah.
Like you said, we redefined everything after World War II. So, I think the link between World War III and the Star Trek universe was redefining culture, redefining technology. I mean, who knows? One of the first technologies they developed for Earth during the 21st, 22nd, maybe 21st century even, were technologies that could clean the air of radiation. Perhaps air reclamators, So I just think maybe it motivated, because you're thinking, the global warming thing on top of that, and, just damage to the planet. I just think that we realized, this is enough. That system didn't work. We need to...
Yeah.
Because if you look at Encounter at Farpoint, and this always got to me, remember when Q was going through that phase where he was disguising himself every 5 seconds as something else?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember when the Star Trek, the little sticker book you put those little square stickers in came out.
Stickers?
It was a sticker book you could get. Remember the old sticker books? You got these stickers packs and you'd put them in the book every week or something?
I had some Star Wars ones, but no,
yeah. Well, they had an Encounter at Farpoint one, and they were talking about it, but the person who wrote this made an interesting remark about Q. They got really personal. They said, Q was a real exhibitionist. And, he kind of was. In the beginning, it's like there's 5 different costume changes and dialogue changes within 10 minutes.
I guess, in a way, he kind of is when he showed up on the bridge naked, remember?
Yeah, that's an exhibitionist, all right. But, like I said, it's like, red alert, naked. Come and get me now. I'm human.
Yeah.
I've done everything and everybody, so come to me. But anyway, the thing is that in the first one he appears as like Napoleonic captain at first.
Yeah.
Freezing somebody with ice, and then the next second he's saying, "We got to put it into the commies. All it takes is a few good men," and all this post World War II stuff. And then,
a history lesson.
Right. And he's disguising himself as each little time period.
Yeah.
And when he did that little World War II thing about the commies and everything, Picard said, all that nonsense is centuries behind us.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get into this because we talk about this. I wrote a blog on my own Star Trek blog about this. To me, that established, as I've heard it being said, that Star Trek world is not a communist one. You got to look at it this way. There were feudal governments that existed in Greece and Rome we don't even know the name to.
Yeah.
Okay? But they were very strong in their time. Egypt, whatever. Babylon. There were governments that were big and meaningful then, but we don't even know what they were called now. But they may have run whole countries.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the idea of communism or capitalism just be very antiquated in that time? A notion that's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
It's like some old-fashioned thing. So he called it nonsense. Like, those are old things that, and I'm wondering if World War III, if those things all collapsed, all those notions.
It had to have, yeah. I mean,
because, like I said, Spock said it in a very non-cynical way. There was that painting that he had that Valeris was looking at in Star Trek VI, the expulsion of paradise, and she didn't understand the interpretation of it, and he said, it's a reminder that all things end.
Yeah.
And, World War III could have been the ending of our understanding and philosophical tract in the beginning of the Star Trek one. That in order to survive, we can't fight among ourselves. We've got a new universe out there. We have warp drive. We've got to deal with ourselves before we go out there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're saying that right now, but, people are still thinking SDI, we're going to do battles in space. And, and I wanted to mention that because it's not mentioned on Memory Alpha. I wonder if, in fact, there was some SDI-like thing happening with World War III. And I wonder even if there was some nuclear missiles exchanged in space during that time, and the reason why there were some issues on Earth is because some of them made it down.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if World War II was all fought terrestrially. It might have been fought somewhat in space.
Yeah, could have been.
Like, there might have been some SDI-type stuff going on. I don't know. They don't really mention that. I mean, I don't know if it was all tanks and planes. It might have been some space stuff, too. I don't know. But the lunar colonies weren't touched by it. There was some early Martian stuff happening. So, I just... There's a lot of what we do know. There's a lot of theoretical, because it kind of comes up.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention one thing to you, because this sociologically is interesting. Picard mentioned to Q in that trial scene in Farpoint that humans knew their own history even if they were ashamed of it.
Yeah.
I mean, we glorify in our culture World War II.
Yep.
It's the big one.
Yeah.
You get the sense in the Star Trek universe that World War III is not like that. It's a figure of shame and embarrassment.
Yeah.
Like how we look at the Nazi Party.
Yeah, they remember it. They remember, how it started, which is what every historian ought to do, is they always should learn from history. So they remember it in the context of learning from the mistake that we made or that humanity made in World War III, how it all got to that.
Now, they seem to look at the Third World War and what led up to it. And you notice in Deep Space Nine especially, there's a great embarrassment and fear of genetically enhanced.
Yeah.
Because the eugenics wars was seen as a catalyst to World War III. That, even Colonel Green had this issue with people being kind of eugenic. That certain people should not be allowed to live and some should, now that I think about it, I noticed eugenics came up a lot in Star Trek. I noticed, remember Kodos the Executioner?
Yeah.
Who did the same thing Colonel Green basically did?
Yeah. Well, yeah, what he did is he got rid of half the population so the other half could live. It wasn't so much based on...
Right, and Spock said he had his own theories of eugenics. He sanctioned aside people he felt would not be as helpful.
Yeah.
And, it didn't explain why his daughter was unhinged psycho killer. But anyway, the point is that seems to take another detour. But anyway, not a bad episode all encompassing, but that they kind of, you see in Star Trek, they kind of have this issue with eugenics that troubles them. This idea that some humans should be allowed to do this.
Yeah.
Well, like there was an episode of The Next Generation, and I don't know from what period this take place on. Remember the Masterpiece Society?
Yep.
It suggested those were post-World War III people who settled that planet.
That's right, yeah.
I wonder if that planet was settled by Colonel Green followers, because they looked at Geordi like there was something really wrong with him.
Yeah,
why would you have a blind person in your society? They can't really contribute anything literally. You're just they're a drain on resources, that sort of thing.
I mean, you mentioned a lot of these colonies that were started right after that. It seems like a lot of people were leaving Earth probably because they felt like Earth was a lost cause and they tried to start humanity somewhere else.
Right, either that or they didn't like the way Earth was going in terms of uniting everybody, and they wanted to start these little eugenics colonies in other worlds. Yeah,
I mean, and it went on even into the 24th century. Remember when Cisco runs into that colony with the Chief O'Brien? And,
the woman who puts people in boxes?
Yeah. I mean, they were kind of like trying to start their own thing, too, but she kind of manipulated the situation to make them all think they couldn't leave. You know?
Right, yeah, but of course that was one little person. It wasn't like a group or anything.
Yeah.
Although, in Deep Space Nine also, and I wanted to mention this because I wonder if this was not a throwback to that era, there was a group of people who went to Risa, who were basically arch conservatives.
Yeah, I remember that.
Starfleet had become lazy.
Yeah.
I wonder if that woman on that planet was one of those people too. What do they call them? Those the essentialists?
Yeah, you know what? They probably were probably this part of the same group because that's the way she was trying to live.
Right, exactly. It was like, pull yourself up by your bootstrap kind of attitudes.
So maybe there was a movement going on Earth in the 24th century where people were getting scared of the technology that seemed to be dominating everyone's life in certain aspects.
Well,
and
and that goes with what we were talking about with how Star Trek started to go then, trying to make it realistic to its audience.
Yeah.
And kind of putting human conflict there where Gene Roddenberry would never have wanted that.
Yeah.
Because an episode like what we do talk about, Gene would never have approved them. He would not have wanted humans to be conflicted among themselves.
Yeah.
But like I said, they started to change that a little in Deep Space Nine. I mean, Next Generation, like you said, had one or two characters, but there were always one or two people. Like in the Drumhead, Picard said, oh, well, this woman was indulging a witch hunt, but there'll always be one person out there like that. He didn't say there'll always be groups of them. In Deep Space Nine, you started to have that essentialist. You started to have things like the Maquis, and, you started to have the Federation seem like bad guys, giving those colonists away to the Cardassians, and they were trying to create conflict among human characters, and I had some issues with that, being a Roddenberry guy, but, I think World War III...
Kind of in that episode with the M5, I mean, they kind of hinted at a little bit of that, even the starships were going to be taking, the computers were going to take away jobs of the captaincy, and stuff like that, and technology was starting to, it was kind of hinted at a little bit with that episode where, there was some fear that, computers were just getting too advanced and humanity was getting shoved aside for the sake of...
Right, but Star Trek, explores the human condition, so that kind of seemed logical. That's why, sometimes I even say to you that you always talk about technology getting heavier on Star Trek ships in the future, as far as you could see. I don't know. Even in Roddenberry's world, he sort of would go against that. He'd make technology that would help humanity, but not take over for them. He would tend to make that the domain of a problem. Like, obviously, with that Daystrom, it ended up being the computer had his fragile ego and apparent instability.
Yeah.
Because the computer is sitting there quoting Dogma, and he's up there, I am great, you are great, and you can see that, his ego is fragile and coming apart, and the computer is acting the same way, and, so it's just, it shows you the frailties of humanity. And I just wanted to add this in as a little aside. I hear people say to me, oh, computers are so terrible, they always have so many problems, and I say to them, who do you think built computers? You think people build computers are perfect space alien level people with super intelligence? It might be a human going through in the middle of a divorce or a death in the family, and then that impacts on how the computer works.
Yeah. Or
it could be a person who puts in the algorithm setting up a computer or a program.
Yeah.
Things like them. So, I don't know if you've seen this.
I'm going to say in defense of the people who design computers, when they first came out on the market back, in the 80s and stuff like that, yeah, the computers were a headache and a half because you had to...
Oh, yeah, because you had to encode everything.
DOS, basically. Everything had to be in DOS.
DOS, yeah, and you had to print everything and code everything.
You had to actually be a person who could create a computer.
Right, you had to program everything. Yeah. Everything had to be programmed.
That's right.
You had to be a computer. You had to compute everything. It wasn't... There was no Windows.
Yeah.
And Windows is very advanced DOS. It runs off DOS, but it's still a whole thing,
But now, I mean, compared to that, to today, the computers are way better than they were then. Way better. Right,
exactly. So, like I said, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. When people say computers are bad, I say computers are as bad as what people make them. I mean, computers don't make themselves yet.
Yeah.
So.
All how you use it.
And you got to figure, if a computer has a problem, you think the person making it is some superior, genetically enhanced con character? And even then, could you imagine a con computer?
You
try to program in something, you task me.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want that. you're a superior user. You wouldn't want that.
Yeah, I mean, now that you bring up that, I mean, now you got where Dr. Phlox on Enterprise was talking about how his race had did genetic engineering, but they didn't have that problem with
the Denoblians.
Yeah, and it's like, well, because humans did it and it didn't work out, doesn't mean that it couldn't have worked out.
Exactly. I mean, the Vulcans might have done that and it worked out with them. I don't know.
Exactly. So, it's not like it's such a bad thing. It's like who's doing it.
This is not related to World War III, but it's a speculation I have.
Yeah.
What if part of what Serac was doing with Vulcans to rid them of emotion wasn't just meditation? What if some of that was genetic engineering?
Well, you never know.
Vulcans had that advanced technology, so I don't know if there was some genetic tampering involved.
Yeah.
I don't know. They don't really discuss that. Vulcans are... The EMH on Voyager is right. The Vulcans are very Victorian about their history.
Yeah.
It's like, we do it and we don't talk about it. We don't talk about Serac much. We don't talk about what happened with the Andorians on Pajem. I had to bring that up.
Because there's a lot in Vulcan history that brings up, the birth of the Romulan Empire, because they are an offshoot of the Vulcan people. And you think that Star Trek would delve more into the Vulcan history, so that way, because all they do is they talk about, we had a big war, 1,000 years later, here we are, and that's basically it. But they never talk about what happened in between,
Yeah, well, like I said, that's alien future history, not related to the Third World War. But maybe Vulcan had a cataclysm like that. We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, for all you know, the Vulcan cataclysm may have been worse than Earth, and Vulcan might not always have been a desert planet.
Yeah, because they had a nuclear war. And maybe the desert look is what was resulted after that.
Maybe they had a worse one than we did, and it maybe, for all we know, the point of the year Vulcan is a mutation.
Yeah.
For all we know, Vulcan is related to a very new planet.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know that. We don't know if Vulcan is this really grim history of one time they looked very different, and the planet was very different, and who knows? I mean, it's hard to tell because there was no written history. I guess it kind of... I thought that was something that was going to drift from World War III, but it kind of went into it. What if Vulcan had a cataclysm worse than humanity did?
Yeah.
And Vulcan wasn't always a desert. That would be an interesting idea, that Vulcan might have been a fertile planet. Vulcans might not have always had green blood and pointy ears, but those were the result of mutations.
Yeah.
And the whole Vulcan race and planet is a gigantic mutation. Of course, that wouldn't explain the Romulans also having 20 years. But still.
It's not World War III related, but in a way it kind of is, because they were going through sort of a similar thing.
Right. So
yeah.
Perhaps, even though the Vulcans were kind of micromanaging Earth, developing spaceships and stuff in the future, what if, when they first came to Earth during World War III, they were very helpful and they were very, and they were very strongly motivated to help Earth because they know how badly their planet had been through things.
Yeah, because they went through it.
I mean, it may seem, but empathy is actually quite logical. Because, when you look at the Vulcan philosophy, it's infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine after Zephram Cochrane met, what was the name of that Vulcan that he first met in Montana? Did he have a name?
I don't even know if he had a name.
Or was that just nameless Vulcan character number 1?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Because how scripts are, they'll say, "Oh, yes, non-speaking town person."
Yeah.
What if this, I always wonder in the TOS if they had, nameless red shirt character, he gets killed off in the next scene. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, what if they said nameless Vulcan who encounters Zephram Cochrane? I would have thought that Vulcan would have been historically important to have a name.
Yeah.
Some people in Enterprise who are in Enterprise suggest that might have been a very young Saval.
Well,
that's weird, but it might have been. It might have been a very young Saval, the Vulcan who was involved with Archer and all of them.
Yeah.
And because that was what was that, like 90 years before Enterprise, the first contact happened?
Yeah, I mean, and Vulcans lived, 200 years or more? So, I mean, yeah, a lot of them were probably around then.
Now that I think about it, I'm getting an idea here. Maybe we should do a blog that goes deeper into what we know about Vulcans. Because for a race who are prime in Star Trek, we don't really know a whole lot about them, long and short.
And they're a fan favorite, the Vulcan.
Right, they were the first alien introduced with Spock and everything, so...
Yeah.
They
should do a lot
more. It's a secret world that they live in. So I guess Vulcan could be a good idea, because the Vulcans were kind of, I always saw the Vulcan encounter as being something of a catalyst. Because, in our society right now, everybody wants to, and I know this personally, not with me, but somebody I know very well, and I was just going into this, humans, even when they're perceiving extraterrestrial life, okay, it tends to come through the context of some kind of creation myth. Mm-hmm. I've actually seen sci-fi. It isn't dystopian. You ever heard of Earth Final Conflict?
Yep.
And the alien race come to Earth who are manipulative. I don't remember them being really terrible villains. They were kind of manipulative. They were kind of looking for something. And the first thing they get on Earth is a church around them. Mm-hmm. Now, I always wonder if Earth had kind of overcome that in the 21st century, doing that with things, or if there was a church of the Vulcans at first. I sometimes wonder if the Vulcans were not, I just have this vision of this stained glass window with a Vulcan in there, just like, we're not worthy, live long and prosper, something like that. Yeah. Some Vulcan worship. And, the Vulcans, of course, would not have taken advantage of that because they would find that level of worship highly illogical. But, the point is that I wonder, I just wonder about stuff like that because we tend to perceive things as, in this time, as needing to kill or die in the name of said whoever.
Yeah.
You can replace it with Allah or whatever. Yeah. Anyone you want. Name interchangeable. Muhammad, in the name of God, whatever you want to use in the name. And I'm wondering if that almost happened with Vulcans, and if Vulcans said, that's your problem. You have to basically realize that you can't fall to your knees to every more advanced creep person you meet.
Yeah.
That, like Picard told that woman on that proto-Vulcan planet, we lived in caves like you, but we learned to make a bow and make houses in in-time starships.
Yeah.
I wonder if the Vulcans had a very similar speech with Earth people. I have this vision that after the war, people are desperate, people are looking for somebody, that some of them fell on their knees to Vulcans, and they're like, oh, we've been talking about these gods here. These are our gods coming down. They're these Vulcans. And if Vulcan said, no, you got it all wrong.
Yeah.
We're not.
That's interesting because that's kind of like what they're doing with the Superman movie now, the newer ones, is they stepped away from the way they approached it with Christopher Reeve, when they, the sort of the fairy tale Peter Pan kind of thing.
Right.
And they went and they say, well, here's Superman now. And they got people actually worshiping him as a god.
It goes right with the more realistic thing.
Yeah, that's basically it. And it's like, well, that's an interesting take on how we would look at Superman, but at the same time, you got people saying that, he's more of a danger to us than not having him around,
Right, well, that's how those things work, you have that double-edged sword, but
yeah,
I think that, like I said, there's this tendency to put somebody up there in this huge, and I'm wondering if that happened. Maybe humanity was kind of past that by the time Vulcans came. I don't know. Well, but I wonder if that kind of thing did happen at first.
It was probably interesting if, for the Vulcans, maybe what got them to land in the first place was, look, they were watching Earth, because we know that they were watching us in the 1950s.
Right, they were watching us with Sputnik and all that, yeah.
That's right. So they come around, they see the Earth is kind of devastated, and then all of a sudden they see some clown flying through space in a warp ship, and they're like, how the hell did this happen? Their planet's all busted up and everything, and this guy...
Yeah, that Zevon Cochrane's story should really be told.
So they say, well, let's go find out who this guy is and what's going on down there,
Right, because they're monitoring Earth, yeah. They see the 50s, they see humanity drifting toward destruction but pulling back. Finally, they see a devastated planet. They think, we're packing up, Earth is gone. And then all of a sudden this Phoenix comes out, like, what happened?
Yeah.
Like you said, this planet should be over, and now, wait a minute, there's something we're missing here.
Yeah, and I could see how, from the Vulcan point of view, that's like, this is totally illogical, because...
It isn't logical, no.
Scientific leap after this devastated war.
If you look at the Memory Alpha thing in World War III, it points out that there were space flights during the height of the war.
Yeah.
that ship that was you talked about in the Royale, the Charybdis, that was during the height of the Third World War.
That's right.
There were still DY-100s, 500s, sleeper ships.
Yeah.
But maybe, who knows, maybe the space manufacturing thing was a haven at that point. People were leaving Earth because of the war, and they survived. And maybe spaceflight had a boom during that time. Because they figured, hey, Earth is gone, it's crap, we'll go to another planet and settle. Who knows?
Yeah.
You ever seen a show called Earth 2? It wasn't Trek canon, but it was a NBC sci-fi show.
Episodes of it, yeah. I mean, it was okay, but yeah.
It was interesting because it kind of started out your typical 90s sci-fi dystopia. Earth is overcrowded. It's all mined, and they're living on space stations and half crippled. But this team of people want to go to this planet and resettle. And, instead they meet this Tim Curry character and these aliens who communicate like the Aborigine.
Yeah.
Through dreams and meditation. It's a meta show. It's interesting. It didn't really take off that much, like you said. But it was an interesting concept. And I wonder if Star Trek and World War III was like that. People figured, okay, Earth is just, no point in dealing with this planet anymore. Let's get on sleeper ships and go out there, Yeah. Now, there was one in Enterprise called the Constantoga. It was a ship that was going to, like a colony ship that was designed to be taken apart. Remember that?
I think so. What episode was that now?
A Terra Nova.
Oh, okay, Terra Nova, yeah.
It was about a colony that kind of went berserk and didn't work out.
Yeah.
Wasn't that kind of in the World War III era, too?
I think so, yes.
Or at least the post-atomic horror.
Yeah.
I imagine there must have been a mass exodus of people wanting to leave Earth during that era.
Yeah, it seemed like there was a lot of people starting colonies, that we later find and forget about years, and then we find them again. It's like they all got their roots from that time period. And
another aspect of World War III that could also be, remember on Enterprise they had Travis Mayweather. Mm-hmm. By the way, I don't know if this is true, but I saw it on a video. There's apparently stories that, what's the guy that played Travis Montgomery something?
I can't remember his name.
Apparently he's doing Star Trek related hip-hop songs now.
Yep.
So, yeah. Star Trek rap.
That's a new one. I never heard of that.
Yeah, apparently that's his thing now. So I'm not going to get into that, but I'm just saying that character. They play a clip of him doing the Star Trek rap. It's better than Shatner, but I mean, anyway. It's actually well done. It's weird.
I'm going to have to look at that.
I don't think he's recorded any Star Trek, hip-hop album, Star Trek produced by Jay-Z or anything. I don't think he's into that, but I'm just saying that, his character was a space boomer.
Yeah.
Who was born on one of these freighters leaving Earth. And I'm wondering if that wasn't like the last gasp of this mass exodus from Earth during the Third World War or after it. People thinking, the Earth is shit, Colonel Green has killed off all the mutants, whoever's need to go out and start again.
Well, I thought the ship that he grew up in was a freighter.
It was a freighter, yeah. But I'm wondering if the space boomer concept wasn't pretty old. Like, people being born in space because they didn't feel it was an Earth to go home to. I mean, we don't know how old some of these freighters were.
Yeah.
I mean, they went with the time period, but some of those freighters might have been 100 years old or so.
Yeah, they didn't need to upgrade them very much.
Because, if you look at... I don't really know how old Jonathan Archer was supposed to be. Because he knew that from Cochrane. We don't know when he died.
He probably met him as a kid, I guess. I mean, I get the impression that his father and Cochrane probably worked together at some point.
Right, because they were working on the Warp 5 project, so...
And then for some reason he just disappeared, Cochrane, and nobody never knew where he went.
But like I said, there are some people who've actually figured that Jonathan Archer, when he took command of Enterprise, was like 70 years old. That's kind of weird, but the idea that Archer was actually very old, and because Ephraim Cochrane died sometime in the very early 22nd century, we know that.
Yeah. And
Archer knew him, so people are speculating Archer's older than he looks. I don't know. I think Paul's about 70. I think Flock mentioned that. Vulcans don't like to talk about their age.
I guess we'd have to examine the timeline closely and see if there's any discontinuity there with the a link, an overlap between Cochrane and Archer, the family, or something like that. You'd have to see that close up.
Right, unless maybe that reference was just a passing thing, because in the first episode, Archer's making that little ship, that little remote control shuttle thing.
Yeah.
And his father was saying, Ephraim Cochrane would be proud, assuming he had died around then.
Yeah.
And young Archer, looked like he was about 11, maybe.
Yeah.
12, maybe around that age. I'm guessing.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that he met Ephraim Cochrane as a child.
Yeah.
So I put him at being middle-aged.
Probably in his late 40s, early 50s, maybe, you know.
Yeah, I don't see him as being 70 years old. I don't know where that came from. That's weird.
If that was the case, they would have picked an older actor to play him, but, you know what?
I mean, because Scott Bakula would have been about that age in Enterprise, right? 40s, 50s, around getting a little older than you are now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that makes some sense that he'd be early middle years, but, you know, just to say he's like, 60, 70 years old, you know.
That doesn't work. That don't fly with me. You know? You'd be older than the
ages of characters in Star Trek is always messed up. I mean, when they put TV Guide out about Star Trek, they specifically said Tuvok is a 75-year-old Vulcan.
You know, obviously.
Then he's on the Excelsior, so he has to be well over a century.
He's got to be that, you know, over that.
So, I don't know. And then, you know, 1 minute Captain Janeway's about 34, the next minute she's 62. You know, it gets weird. Yeah. You know, I don't know how the ages work. And, you know, it's funny. I read this thing, and this is an aside from World War III. I just wanted to point this in. I read somewhere where somebody said Harry Kim was fresh out of the academy on Voyager was only 19. Now, he was young, but I don't see him as being like 19, 18.
He looked a little bit older than that, yeah.
I would say about 24 maybe, but not like 19. He was a baby.
He was a bit old to be an ensign, though. I mean, he spent the whole series with.
Well, we could do a whole video on how Harry Kim did not advance in rank.
I know. I mean, he should have been more than an ensign even when we first meet him.
And they mentioned that too. You know, he kind of mentioned that. You know, why am I on this ship and doing all these heroic things, and you never put another pip on my collar?
Yeah.
You give and take one to Paris, but you don't give one to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
I mean, she took one from Paris for violating regulations, but she gave him back to him. It was like, hey, why don't I get a pip, you know?
Everybody was crying and moaning about why Worf never got a promotion, and most of the time he was on Next Generation.
You know what they could have done with Harry Kim? What? They could have made him an acting lieutenant. Like that acting ensign thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be acting on me because if they had promotion.
I know. I'm just saying they could have done something foolish like that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I guess you have to go away from the main subject here to get humor in it. I'm just saying that, yeah, so I guess we do kind of divert from these subjects. But, you know, it all plays into a rich tapestry. One thing I wanted to mention, and this is the rough one because everybody's trying to figure out, because, you know, we're starting to kind of see issues like this happen now with cryptocurrency, right, with, you know, the internet having a lot of free media, YouTube and stuff. In the 22nd century, at some point, early, maybe when Zefram Cochrane was alive, something came along that I think would have changed the Earth greatly. Something called the New World Economy. And I guess what it meant is that money just disappeared. I'm wondering what effect World War III would have had on that. I have an impression that World War III pretty much destroyed the economic base of the world.
I don't see how it couldn't, because, I mean, you got Wall Street. I mean, Wall Street was
Wall Street's probably gone.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because from what I gather, most of the East Coast was probably wiped out because we don't hear about anything about what you said. We don't hear about New York. We don't hear about Washington. We don't hear about Boston.
I don't want to seem like home teamers here, but nobody ever talks about Maine in the Star Trek universe. Where are we?
Yeah, but Maine is like one of them states you really never hear about in Hollywood.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, for all I know, they could have the United Federation of Planets New England here. I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting if that's what it was. That would be fun. You know, but now Bangor International Airport could be Starfleet New England.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought, you know. Send it to Stephen King. Anyway, anyway. So the point is that, boy, I'm surprised that came out of me. But anyway, I guess, yeah. So the point is we don't really hear about what happened in those areas. So and that Lily in Star Trek First Contact said, it took me this and this amount of time to scrounge up enough platinum to build this ship.
Yeah.
So apparently, I mean, apparently Lily's an aerospace engineer because she's working with Zefram Cochrane.
Yeah. And
the way she talks to Kirk, I get the impression that she's a hardcore engineer work bee type.
Yeah.
You know, she understands aerospace physics pretty well. She's not that surprised by the Enterprise. I mean, she's a little shocked by it.
Yeah.
She thinks the Borg sound Swedish, but she kind of conceives them. So obviously she's no slouch. And she's apparently so busy she doesn't have time to read Melville.
Yeah.
So we know that she's not exactly a slouch, but the point is that she was obviously scrounging around in this wreckage to find stuff to build this warp ship.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, was there starting to be a barter economy during that time? I mean, was it getting kind of like the economic system just collapsed as we knew it, and people were just scrounging and trading?
Because in First Contact, Cochrane and Riker were in the cockpit, and they were just chatting to each other, and they were kind of having this discussion about...
Right, when they were launching the ship, yeah.
Yeah, before they launched it, and they were saying, about he was uncomfortable about being looked at as being some kind of big historical thing. And he says, why I'm building this is dollars.
Dollars.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking that maybe there was still some money being used.
Well, you gotta think. If Cochrane, I don't know how old Ephraim Cochrane was when that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I estimate him being born around 20, 25, 30-ish.
Yeah, early 20th.
Because he said when he died, he was old.
Yeah.
So I have this feeling he was like a George Washington who lived to be like 100 and... Maybe Ephraim Cochrane had the gold cane of the new United Earth and was like 110 or something when he died. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I don't think he died young exactly, or whatever happened, the companion thing. I don't think that happened when he was young. Yeah. But, I'm guessing that he came from a time where there was a Wall Street, where there was money, and he was still thinking in those old ways.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you didn't see on that planet cash registers, like a snack bar in that little place where they were having drinks.
Yeah.
You didn't see Ephraim Cochrane ordering a Budweiser Classic. Hello. I know that's not Prime, but I had to insert that. That always gets me. Budweiser Classic. Anyway, but I always find that funny. But, anyway, so I think of Cochrane as thinking that, when they revive the economy, they're going to congratulate me and give me all these patents on it.
Yeah.
But anyway, how I've used Ephraim Cochrane, as we talked about in First Contact and in the TOS, we discussed that. That could be a whole other video. Ephraim Cochrane could be a whole other video, because we got two of them out there, basically.
Yeah, there's two different interpretations of the same.
Well, unless you count the James Cromwell Part 2 interpretation from Enterprise, which you didn't see a lot of.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like Ephraim Cochrane has all these multiple identities. It's where there's really no way to... I mean, in the future, they describe him as this really influential, elegant figure with all these quotations. In a way, almost like the Bernie Sanders of the 22nd century. Yeah. If there was a Facebook in that time, you could see Ephraim Cochrane quotes, and everything, what was it? Don't be a great man, just be a man, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I can't see a guy looking for dollar signs ever saying stuff like that. I mean,
that's really not the way we got it from TOS anyway. That he was a guy that was after money.
No, that guy in TOS seemed like he might make quotes like that. Seemed a little more noble and a little more elegant.
Yeah.
Like I said, in a John Boy Walton sort of way. He did seem like he was a little bit of a farm boy, but to be honest, I think that, his reaction to the companion, if you remember, he was kind of like, I don't want to be some half-human monster.
Yeah.
Kind of a little provincial and parochial.
He still had some of those 21st century hang-ups about different, a lot of humans, I guess, would have felt the same way he did about an alien or something like that, Right.
And also kind of, like I said, kind of this, still kind of a slightly Midwestern parochial attitude that, I hear a lot. But I didn't see him as a drunk who was going to go out and dance to a jukebox and say, I'm going to take a leak and, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, I mean, because that doesn't even come close to...
They made him kind of cheap, didn't
logic of a man that would take time out of his doldrum and his drinkingness to go and build some kind of a spaceship that travels faster than light. I mean, this guy looks like an auto mechanic.
Like I said, I can't see him like, yes, I can make a warp car. I'm not drunk. No.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Does this guy really think he has the intelligence? The concepts that he has in his mind, the way he talks, the way he acts. I mean, this is a guy that's looking to kill himself. I mean, he just,
Yeah, it just, now, like I said, unless the whole story was that Lily, who seemed like she knew what was going on, kind of ghost built it. Which, no, I'm not going to buy that either.
I think the writer was trying to say that ordinary people can do great things, but they went a little too far on the ordinary right into.
Yeah, they were trying to make him realistic by 90s standards, which meant
they went into the absurd.
So they turned Zefram Cochrane from a human who was vulnerable into almost a loser character.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, okay, we get the idea that, an ordinary person can achieve great things, but an ordinary person doesn't have to be a motorcycle gang member or some kind of...
Right, or like this is like an auto mechanic who's kind of vulgar and just garish.
I mean, let's give the guy some credit. He's smart. He has to be able to do some things that are a little bit out of the region of normal.
I mean, like I said, they could have made Zefram Cochrane more like Richard Branson.
Yeah.
A kind of a loose figure who skydived and was adventurous, but you could tell there was an intelligence.
Yeah, the way he would speak and his ideas and stuff would come across to you as a guy that's got deep thoughts and intelligent.
Right. So you could make Zefram Cochrane alternative, but not so aggressively alternative.
Yeah.
I'm just using the terms of the time, But they kind of went away with it. So unless they went...
It's not Cromwell's fault. He's a good actor in any other.
Yeah, they gave him a weird characterization of this person to play.
I think it was just the direction that Jonathan Frakes wanted him to go in with that character. Maybe I don't know if it was even in the script that way or something, but it just didn't seem. It was
This may sound kind of snarky of me, but I have this feeling somebody in that production said, "We got to go out there and make some of that Dazed and Confused money." That's just the vibe I get. Like we gotta connect with our audience, so Zefram Cochrane can't be too heroic.
Yeah.
But like I said, you gotta figure warp drive's an advanced physics concept. Unless Zefram Cochrane had this dual character we didn't see. And why would you fabricate something like warp drive for $signs?
Yeah.
I mean that
that brings up a concept that you wouldn't think would still be around after a major war.
Yeah, I mean,
why would that even be in play?
Like I said, it might make sense if he said, I want to develop warp drive so I can get notoriety, so I can be famous. I mean, that might make sense.
Yeah,
but
that would have been better. Yeah.
$signs, it's like, who's going to lavish money on him for going faster than light necessarily after a war?
And then if you get all this so-called money, what are you going to do with it? Nothing's around. There ain't no
right, and who's going to give you money after a war anyway? They're trying to build society.
Yeah, what are you going to buy?
Like, and how could a guy who entertained a notion like that ever have the modicum of intelligence to build the first functional warp core?
That's right.
He's thinking of $signs after a third World War cataclysm, yet he can build a warp core? No. That level of intelligence wouldn't have jived up at all.
Yeah.
So I guess there was a little writing issue there, but Zefram Cochrane, I think the character needs to be redefined a little better because I'm going to go with TOS as who he actually was.
Yeah.
Because that guy seemed to know his stuff. He recognized the Enterprise shuttle as being futuristic, but he kind of knew what it was.
Yeah.
He recognized the warp concept and the lines and everything, and it was kind of romantic. He wasn't sitting there barfing like Zefram Cochrane in the First Contact would have.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, Kirk, I gotta go take a leak. Excuse me. He wasn't.
Yeah. Go up sipping on a beer bottle or something like that. Oh, hey guys.
Yeah, I mean, but, like I said, they say the 90s was the 60s turned upside down anyway, so that's probably why they did it. They're like, we got to make Zefram Cochrane an anti-hero.
Yeah. But,
like I said, obviously, some anti-hero, in the end of the day, Earth got past it. He met up with the Vulcans. Mm-hmm. I mean, he almost frightened the Vulcan by turning on Ooby Dooby, but... I'm just saying that it's just like I said, putting Zefram Cochrane into World War III in that era, he must have been working on this project right in the middle of the war.
Yeah, it's not something that would have been done quickly.
So, like I said,
And the thing, and then since it was in a military installation, how in blazes would he have gotten permission to even go in there in the first place and tamper around with a Titan missile?
Well, I get the impression that he was working on it, but he couldn't get funding because of the war. Then when that cataclysm happened, he said, okay, well, I'll work on this warp ship. That's not very logical, but...
Yeah, but the place would have had to been abandoned for him to even be allowed to go in there. He was just a civilian, unless.
And also, he could have said to Riker, "You know, I really built this ship because I want to escape from Earth because we have no future here. We have no hope. I just want to get people off the Earth. I don't care about my future." I mean, that would have still kept the cynicism.
We know Cochrane ends up on Alpha Centauri, so maybe they should have added that in there and say, "I'm building this because I want to go someplace other than Earth."
This is non-canon. Do you remember a FASA-related book about Star Trek aliens?
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about.
They just slapped a bunch of aliens from the animated series in there, and they referred to Zephram Cochrane as being a humanoid from Alpha Centauri who looked like humans, but they were double-jointed. They just made a whole bunch of stuff up. They just invented this whole alien race. I just figured Alpha Centauri was some uninhabited fertile planet that humanity colonized.
Well, that's because in the TOS series, they referred to him as Zephram Cochrane of
Alpha Centauri, not like he was a native of that planet.
In with Alpha Centauri, they say he was of Alpha Centauri. So we assume that there was a colony on that world, and he was born and came from there somehow and made.
So that's kind of a weird concept, but he always acted like a Midwestern farm boy to me. He never seemed extraterrestrial per se.
Yeah, I mean, because he was talking about growing
big trees.
Yeah, trees. Yeah, big trees. And
he was into figs for some reason. But anyway, the thing is that he seemed very land. I believe the term used to be Shetlandish, like kind of a farmer boy type. That's kind of the vibe I got from him. Certainly not the mechanic, gross first contact guy.
Yeah.
That was. I mean, I could have seen him as kind of a farmer with a little piece of wheat in his mouth, maybe, if you wanted to caricaturize him, but certainly not whatever that was.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, it would make sense because, as you said, if they're attacking the cities during World War III, there might have been a lot of people escaping to the country.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he might have been just from an area that escaped that because he was in the middle of the country where there was no, first target strike.
Yeah. There was no.
Coming to what was happening around him. And there were econ scouts who came around, but, it wasn't like on his doorstep.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what kind of horrible places Washington and New York was during those years.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that, World War III, like I said, it's like World War II. As crazy as this is, a lot of the U.S., aside from economic situations, was fairly untouched by it, physically.
Yeah.
I mean, we were involved in it, but kind of in Germany and Japan and stationed in France and Germany. But there really were, except for Pearl Harbor, there really were no major battles fought here. I don't think there was any other. So, but World War III might have been different. There might have been more battles on U.S. soil.
Yeah, I mean, the world's a smaller place when you have that kind of firepower. I mean, you just...
Right. So, I mean, World War III could have just been that. The powers of the world being more on equal keel in terms of their abilities. And it wasn't just this country fighting wars in China or fighting wars in Africa or fighting wars where have you. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't even know what was going on in Canada during those years. For all we knew, World War III might have not affected that country too much, and a lot of people might have fled there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the geopolitics of it because it's a reference in Gene Roddenberry's world. It's something humanity are embarrassed about.
Yeah.
And maybe they figured, since that's the way it was written, we have to make Zephram Cochrane into an embarrassing figure.
Well, they keep saying a lot of times that a lot of the records of that period were lost.
Yeah, kind of a digression. Like, well, we don't know because all that stuff's lost.
Yeah, so it's like they just kind of, it's just their way of just saying, well, we're not going to
push it off, yeah.
About it, we're just going to say that. And leave it
on the other hand,
yeah,
Data seemed to have a great deal of information about the European hegemony, this Liam Deegan character. There was information in Enterprise there was film footage of Colonel Green right during the middle of the war.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all was lost.
Well, you can't just say everything was lost. I mean, there had to have been people around that had to record what they remember of it, and it just got passed down. So there were people that obviously kept some kind of record of it.
But like I said, Enterprise was a little long in the tooth in the Star Trek chronology to have any episodes about elderly World War III veterans.
Yeah.
I mean, if you would look at a story, I imagine if you look at if there was ever a movie or something or a story about the Warp 5 project, in the very early 22nd century, there might have been some dialogue from aging World War III veterans.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, unless Colonel Green killed them all. See, we don't know. I mean, Colonel Green might have done a lot of damage and might have just erased a lot of that history just for the sake of his own eugenics project. Yeah. Even Memory Alpha, there's some things that don't jive. I mean, just some qualities that don't really make sense in the long and short of things.
That's true. I mean, there's some contradictions, and there's some things that even Memory Alpha says not certain of or estimated, or because they just brush over it. They don't really get into too much detail about that area before everything went great, into the Star Trek thing. So it's just, but I think there's an interest out there with Star Trek fans that would like to know a little bit more about it, but it's like they just don't want to even talk about it. I don't know. I mean, you think they would now with all these interests about, like you said, dystopian futures and stuff like that. You think they would do some kind of a Star Trek movie about World War III, or something, and how it all became what we know of it today.
Well, you mean like a Star Wars story kind of thing?
Well, no, I mean like they want to do all these prequels all the time. So why don't we even go even further back and just look at how an era ended and a new era began?
Well, again, if you did a movie about Third World War that had a good outcome, it wouldn't exactly go with modern dystopian sci-fi, would it?
Yeah.
It would be anachronistic. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind anachronistic to that for sure.
Yeah, but it would probably be it would probably accept it at some point. I mean, it would just, people would see a different ending to something that they're used to seeing as a bad ending to things, because
exactly. I mean, it wouldn't be another world as terrible thing.
It would be something unique. It wouldn't, because nothing's being done like that right now, where you see something bad, good come out of something so bad.
That's one of the main lessons we can learn from Star Trek. Yeah, in its time, if I understand it, Star Trek kind of tanked with the Nielsen's.
Yeah.
I think it had its devoted core always. Wasn't there always a fan cult even during its airing?
Yeah, even when it was shaky in the ratings.
Like the Trimbles, weren't they kind of watching it first run?
Yeah.
So they were into it. They led the fan campaign. Bijou Trimble, they led the fan campaign. But like I said, you can't sustain something on a cult following.
Yeah.
But when it came into syndication, all of a sudden people realized, oh, so it's the time slot that was messed up. We can get into this. So, like I said, all of a sudden, there are these little issues in TOS they had to deal with, and that's why I'm glad an Encounter at Farpoint. I know a lot of people, yes, it's going to come up. I have to do this because we've already discussed this. When The Next Generation came on, people might have been upset about Picard being too by the book, or mentioning detecting Q on the detector circuit.
There we go.
And that had to come up. And the detector circuit's going to be running gag continually. But they might make a picked on that, but they have to admit they reframed that Third World War thing with the post-atomic horror pretty well. They gave it a voice and a name. It wasn't just Spock stating statistics.
Yeah.
Before, World War III was kind of a statistic. You didn't see... I mean, if you notice on the original Star Trek, probably due to budget reasons, every time they went time travel, it was always back to the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they didn't... Obviously, they weren't going to time travel into the 80s because they just didn't know what it was going to be. But you never saw... Well, City on the Edge of Forever, they went back to the 30s.
Yeah.
But mostly it was the 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, that Gary 7 thing could have happened in, 1993.
Yeah.
But they had it 68 because it was made in 68, so it just was easy to do it on location or whatever they did.
Yeah, because they probably didn't, if they did it in that time period, they wouldn't have to spend so much money on trying to dress up the sets to make it look, like a different era.
Right, and with the 30 again, they still had a lot of stuff from the golden age of Hollywood. They could still gussy everything up to look like... Because if I understand it about the Hollywood lots in those days, a lot of that stuff from the old Bette Davis movies or the Clark Gable films from the 30s and 40s were still kind of up in the 60s. So they might use one of those old sets from Gone with the Wind. Not Gone with the Wind.
Well, look how many times they use that Back to the Future town. I mean,
really?
They've used it. Yeah, they've used it in TV shows and other movies. I mean, it's always redressed, but it's the same town.
You mean Hill Valley?
Yeah, that town where every time with has the town hall with the bell or the clock.
Clock tower. They've used that in other shows.
Oh yeah, tons of other movies and
I
TV.
never noticed that. Maybe I never seen the other movies it was in. I don't know.
Yeah, you have to. I think they actually used it in what was it? The Gilmore Girls too. They had that TV show.
Yeah, I never say Gilmore Girls, so I wouldn't really know if that was in that or not. But
They used parts of the set on that, and on the Waltons actually. There was when John Boy Goes to College. That was the set they used for the college.
in one of the Waltons movies,
Huh?
one of the Waltons TV movies from the 80s.
No, from the actual series, the 70s.
Oh, so that Back to the Future set was old when they used it.
Yeah, it was that went way back. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so that makes sense. They may have used like maybe that set they used for Edith Keeler and all that was from an old Edward G. Robinson film that was still just hanging around.
Yeah, I mean,
All
all they
set in that era.
redress it, and it can look like any period.
Right. So they could do things that were of that time, but it would be hard to create a 21st century world. By the time with the next generation, there was a little more of a sense of futurism, and they could create that World War II, World War III thing a little better.
Yeah.
Because if you notice, remember that crowd that Q had in that courtroom who were all looked like refugees from Mad Max, basically?
Yeah, they look like wearing rags and dirty.
And did you see people like that in First Contact, if I remember?
First Contact. Well, yeah, they kind of like the ones that were living with Cochran in that little camp there, I guess. Yeah. Kind of.
So I gather there were people running around in rags during that time.
Yeah. It just whatever they could find for clothes.
Except, again, Alfred Woodard's character, Lily, was dressed fairly well.
Yeah. Cochran's stuff wasn't that beat up looking either, so he was,
Yeah, well,
it was a weird jacket he had on and, pants. And
yeah, basically, whatever. Zephyr Cochran was turned, because remember in the original show, every time somebody from the 21st century appeared, they had this, like, orangish jumpsuit with this little root beer wheelbarrow thing.
Yeah, it looked like sort of like a prison outfit,
Like a prison uniform.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they just...
Colonel Green had something like that.
Yeah, they figured everything would be like jumpsuits or something, I guess.
Yeah, they just gave them these prison outfits, and they these little, remember the little barrels, like the little like whiskey barrels? The 2 whiskey barrels.
Yeah,
I don't know what that was.
I don't know what it was supposed to mean, but
apparently everybody from the 21st century had that little thing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering why Zephyr Cochran didn't have that little thing. I don't know why they didn't have that little thing in Enterprise, whatever that was. Maybe that was, who knows, maybe that was a symbol for Econ or something, or some coalition.
There was a lot of things back in the 60s that people were hopeful would see by the 90s, and it never came to be.
I just realized, I'm wondering if that Colonel Green outfit from the Savage Curtain wasn't a redress of Zephyr Cochran's outfit from Metamorphosis. Because it had the same barrel, it had the same, it was just red.
I'll have to look at that, yeah.
Cochran was orange, but Colonel Green's was red. Unless they just maybe it's like that old folk song about little boxes. There's a pink one, there's a green one. Maybe they just put them in different colored Skittles uniforms. I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe humans would look like Skittles. Let's have all these primary colored outfits,
Yeah, I mean, that was like what we saw on the Planet of the Apes when they were doing when the Planet of the Apes. Remember that? What was it? Battle for the Planet of the Apes. All the apes were wearing jumpsuits, and all the people were basically wearing jumpsuits. And it's like that's what people thought back then, that the future would look like that we would have hover cars, we'd be wearing jumpsuits, we'd be wearing
nobody anticipated ripped jeans and parachute pants and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, people had some radical ideas about the way that today's time would be, back then.
I mean, you look at Trip to the Moon back in the early 1900s. You had people from the future still wearing top hat and tails.
Yeah.
Or women wearing those giant hoop dresses and just. Yeah. And of course, you look at videos from the 50s, and they talk about here's life in 1990, and people still have flipped hair bouffants and mini skirts and. Yeah,
but the funny thing is we live in the 21st century, but we're living in a multiple of different eras, because you can go around any street corner, find something from the 50s.
Right, the fashion brings it back, yeah.
Yeah, and we got people wearing clothes that was 30 years ago, and I mean, I see a mishmash of different time periods all in one. So you think we would have learned by now that the future isn't really going to be that much different.
What I'm wondering is that why it didn't in First Contact they just have every character wear these multicolored jumpsuits with these little whiskey barrel things on them.
Yeah.
Like just have jumpsuit people rather than have everybody look like they were wearing, stone knives and bearskins.
Yeah.
That's what it looked like. It was stone knives and bearskins they were mostly wearing.
Yeah.
Like they just had these little metal things, and they had these. I don't know. It just didn't look like what I would think that era would. But again, TOS set things up weird sometimes. Like they had like I said, the '60s thing where everybody in the future was going to have jumpsuits.
Yeah.
I mean, in TOS they wore shirts and pants for uniforms, but they weren't jumpsuits. They were shirts and pants.
Well, they did have some jumpsuit uniforms, I guess, but
I don't remember that till the TNG really when they had those jumpsuit outfits in the beginning.
Well, there was. I remember Laura was wearing something.
Oh yeah, in TNG, yeah, but I mean in TOS they didn't have them.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, in motion picture they had pajama-looking things, but they weren't really jumpsuits. But yeah, in Next Generation it was definitely back to the jumpsuit. They had the jumpsuit.
Yeah. That
mustard thing you're talking about, the Laura thing.
Yeah.
It
seemed like something that a regular crewman would wear.
Right. First season TOS was all about the jumpsuit or the sweater.
Yeah.
And we all know one character wore the sweater, so.
Yeah.
Like I said.
What was that ambassador that had that outfit that had that collar that went around, looked like remember, what was his name? Was a Taste of
was it the Taste of Armageddon one?
Ambassador Fox.
Oh my God, the frog man!
Yeah. And he had that freaking
frog thing. It's like it looked like a pole or something.
That was the most ridiculous freaking. And this guy, I mean, I can't picture a guy at his age wearing a stupid thing looking like that. I mean,
can you imagine him going down to Meteor 7 saying, "I'm a toad, ribbit. You got a collar. I'm a toad."
He had a super collar that went around like a guy and bordered his head.
Now, here's the thing about that. When they had the Next Generation ambassador, the one in the Galileo 7, remember? He had kind of a grayish outfit with all kinds of little blingy things on it, which looked more official. But the First Generation ambassador we see, it was like a friggin' toad. This giant, green, weird collar-y thing,
Yeah, that was weird. It made John and Pat look normal. I mean, it was like...
it didn't even look like something anyone would ever wear. Yeah. I saw visions of the future with a lot of jumpsuits and people, if you remember, you see people in the 90s and the 60s and these futurist things wearing these kind of Nehru things,
Yeah.
So yeah, put him in some kind of futuristic Nehru thing with this giant froggy collar that's like a toad man or something.
I mean, do they remember thick clothing would be so different, is it really going to be that different? Because, how long I'll tell you this. Women always get the best fashion. Men, they're always stuck with the same thing: a shirt, pants,
and like 3 colors.
Yeah, but it's not fancy. But women always get the best clothes. They always get the fancier kind of clothes. They're the ones
exactly
styles of the generations. The men keep getting the same crap every generation. So I think men in the future would still be wearing a shirt, jeans.
Well, I don't know if you remember Enterprise, which I always find a little strange. The Starfleet officers still wore suit and ties. The admirals and stuff.
Yeah.
Which, I find kind of weird. Like, you have, I think, Admiral Forrest that wears a little tie.
Yeah, it was sort of a throwback to the current time. Because the
right. But you don't see him call that giant toad collar or anything like that.
It wasn't that, big of a change. Yeah.
And, you certainly didn't see ambassadors in TNG with giant toad collars or could you imagine if Star Trek Phase 2 would come out and all of a sudden ambassadors started wearing orange Vegas fringe, like 6 Feet Roy? They could have... just if they were going with the times.
Yeah.
Remember in Battlestar Galactica, they kind of tried to do that? Yeah, they tried to make it a little contemporary to the 70s.
Everything on Galactica was robes. Everything had robes. Everybody was wearing robes. Where,
that's in the 70s thing. Everybody had these long robes on.
Yeah.
Or either that, or you had things like Aaliyah's collar. Remember that giant thing she had?
Yeah. It was like it came up. It was low cut, and it came up like right around the
right. Because remember, she comes out of the shower.
Yeah. Yeah, that's away for a probe to arrive on a ship.
I know this goes away from World War III, but this is a little. We'll call this a reliever to end the kind of serious-mindedness. I need a probe. I always love that scene because if you look in it, Princess Kimbara, is I pronouncing her name correctly?
Yep.
If you look at her carefully, she's sitting there.
Yeah.
She's taking a shower, and she's a probe. And he's like, "What's she doing before we get out of this?"
Probe needs to take a shower before she kills him.
I mean, it could have worked out in the part like, yes, I've been sent by Vija, but I had to clean up first.
Yeah.
With soap. I'm a probe, I need soap and water, or whatever that sonic shower had in it.
Yeah, that was a very strange concept of how a probe would enter the Enterprise.
I mean, you would think the probe would just kind of spontaneously beam up or something.
Yeah. I mean,
taking a shower. It's like,
yeah, she could have just showed up on the transporter pad, but no, it's got to be through the shower. You know, what if they just have to come up through the toilet? You know, or something.
Gosh, like really? I've been sent by Vija to monitor these carbon-based units. I was going in there. That would have been weird, but I literally did.
Oh man.
No, I mean, you know, for years I've watched the motion picture.
Yeah.
And yes, everybody out in the audience, I am trying to avert the serious-mindedness of this right now. I really am, because this has always been a funny issue with me. I would watch the motion picture, and, you know, everything would kind of, I mean, people find it a little dull and possible. I kind of get where the narrative was going. So Ilea was vaporized. Okay, I got that. This is how I define unwarranted. There's a bunch of stuff that happens. Then you have that red alert, intruder alert, location, a sonic shower. Okay, I never heard of the sonic shower before. We hadn't really heard of it. Yeah. So they never really mentioned sonic showers in TOS, did they?
I don't think so.
So then you go down there and you see Ilea's profile. She's taking a shower.
Yeah.
I thought, is she alive again? So then she comes out clothed in this outfit, and she's not real.
Yeah.
I said, so, I mean,
it's just absurd. Was supposed to be a bathrobe. I mean, this thing with a collar, you know, that's a bathrobe. I mean, that, I don't know. She wore that the rest of the movie. She wore
and not only that, the sonic shower rotates, so she's in there like a model in a shower.
Yeah.
Like, here's how we soap ourselves. I mean, really, to be honest with you, for the motion picture, it's not too far removed from whip, stir, stir. It's totally, you know, except for the moment. Like, why is she taking a shower if she's a probe? You know? Is that how probes work? I mean, can you imagine if they're launching a probe in the next TNG because they send a Class 5 probe, they go soap it up first, put it in a sonic shower?
Yeah. You know? Where's our probe? Go check the sonic shower. It's probably there. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, and when Data shows up in the ship, he's sitting there on the bridge scanning for life forms or whatever he's doing. You don't see Data taking a shower and coming out. I mean, that's not how artificial life forms. When Lore came around, they didn't find Lore in a shower.
Yeah.
They found him in a I guess it was like a closet something. I mean, you didn't see Lore there taking a shower. Oh, yes, I'm Data's brother. I'm taking a shower. You know, I don't know where that shower thing came from. I mean, they almost didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
The Ilea probe could have just beamed onto the bridge or come on, or just, like, you know, that little ball of light that Vija sent out, this little, when the probe was originally, it could have disappeared and then manifested itself as the probe.
Yeah.
Why is it taking a shower?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not like it's in the shower and there's some sort of construction going. You can see she's kind of taking a shower, and I'm like,
well, I remember they were during. If you listen in the background, they were saying the temperature was. They said something like, "Oh, it's white hot," and then the computer kept saying that it was cooling down. It's like, so. In other words, she showed up in the sonic shower as something that was really hot, and I guess she was in there probably just to cool the body down or something. I mean, I don't know.
Right, but you see he was taking a shower. It's like,
yeah.
How is this done? They said, oh, you're supposed to be a probe in there. You should be standing still. No, I gotta be taking a shower.
Yeah.
And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That's not very logical. And then she comes out fully clothed, of course.
Yeah.
So that scene just didn't make any logical sense to me.
Yeah.
You know, I gotta say, I'm surprised they didn't write something in where Spock pointed out the utter illogic of that whole situation. It didn't seem to connect. I mean, it maybe, again, people say the motion picture was supposed to be an effects show. Maybe they just said, let's just throw light to the wind and just show weird effects.
Well, even the actors on most of them don't even think that movie was really that great. You know, like even Leonard Nimoy said they were trying to do a takeoff of 2001, a Space Odyssey. They wanted it to be filmed in that way, and he didn't think it was that great. He didn't like his lines. Everything was unknown. Every time they asked Spock what was going on, his answer was unknown. He didn't like that. And he says nobody felt like they were really in character and stuff. But, amazingly enough, the movie I thought was better than they thought that it was, because
I agree. Except that shower scene, whatever that was about.
Yeah, I mean, there was an overall story that seemed more Star Trek than what they ended up with in the second movie, because the second movie was basically just, an action battle kind of thing going on, which, isn't unique with Star Trek, because in the TOS series, you've had
I guess we could make a blog or a podcast on Star Trek movies in the future, but I noticed today the Wrath of Khan is the standard for all the movies.
Mm.
And you've mentioned something about the Wrath of Khan, that you had some issues with Nick Meyer basically heavily militarizing every element of it.
Yeah.
It could become a trope like the circuits on this thing too. the scene with David and Kirk fighting and the pins plinking off.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, apparently Nick Myers had everybody shooting all these pins.
Yeah, he wanted everything to look sort of like connected to the 20th century. And, he was the guy that directed that movie, by the way, a day after,
Yep. Nick Meyer directed that?
Yeah. That was his movie, that TV movie. He directed that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that we could say we dovetail that into what we're talking about here, because, he's taking, Star Trek 2 and tried to turn it into some kind of grim thing like that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the Genesis thing was kind of this possibility that, okay, this could terraform a planet quickly, but it would destroy life that was there in favor of its new matrix. So, Bones is reacting to that like it's a World War III throwback. Like, you're talking about legendary life on Earth, don't have any emotions, Spock, you green-blooded, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So, the idea that this could be used in a bad way.
Yeah.
Which kind of did happen, but that seemed to be Nick Meyer's thing. I don't know if Gene and him had some issues between each other, but he seemed to like somewhat mild post-apocalyptic flavors.
Mm.
Or something that would involve a conflict that would require a Starfleet crew wearing big, bulky outfits with a lot of pins on them. I mean, to be honest with you, now that I think about it, we haven't really done Star Trek uniforms yet. I mean, that's not really, a lot of people do that, but to be honest with you, I've never seen pins used to the excess they were in that era.
Not to that extent. I mean, I like the idea of the braids on the sleeves,
Yeah, they had those in TOS. Those were all right.
Yeah, I mean, that looked that looks military in a way.
Yeah, it looked more naval. It looked more uniform-like.
I mean, but the ones they ended up with in Star Trek 2 look more dressy. They look more like dress
Yeah, they're kind of Napoleonic almost.
Yeah, they didn't look like duty uniforms. They were more like dress uniforms.
It was very pageantry and, a lot of stuff that you wouldn't wear in combat situations.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on duty, you wouldn't want to wear something that's got all these pins.
I mean, look what happened to Kirk in that fight with David. The things are flying off.
Yeah. I mean, even his regular, that jacket he wore when he was just leaving the ship, he had all the years in service on his sleeve, and that's a lot of pins, because he's been captain and admiral, for 30-something years. I guess he's done all these jobs. So there was a lot of pins, because each pin, it represented how many years in service. So he had quite a bit of pins there. Then he's got, pins up on here and everything. Well, here he goes. He's out there doing stuff, and the pins are coming off. I
mean, imagine in Next Generation. Remember how they would talk about Data having the star cross and clusters with all this stuff?
Yeah.
Imagine if he had to come to duty every day wearing all this stuff all over him.
Yeah.
Like, I had to put my cluster here and some crazy star cross there. They'd be walking around all bow-legged, even as an android.
Data, he had a thing where he put all his ribbons in. Kirk,
he didn't stick it on him. Picard didn't.
Put all of his ribbons in. So those things were only worn when you wore a dress uniform. You'd put them on that. That was it.
And, with Enterprise, I remember reading, I think it was TV Guide, that said that the producers of Enterprise, I think a guy named Manny Cotto, who wrote the executive producer of Enterprise, said that they're not Federation people, they're not Starfleet officers. These are astronauts. He wanted Archer and his crew to be seen as advanced astronauts. That's why he put them in those NASA-like things with patches on the shoulder.
Yeah, I got that.
But, I mean, that was fine. I mean, they didn't have pins all over them.
No, they had patches, and
right. Like I said, it goes with the astronaut idea.
They actually had it looked almost sort of like the Next Generation style pins, 4 pins for the captain.
Right, they had little rank pips.
Yeah, except theirs weren't pips; they were squares, like little.
Right, they were like little. They looked like O'Brien's thing in Deep Space Nine. Remember that little weird pip he had?
So yeah, I mean, you could see that probably in the Next Generation they wanted to go back a little bit with that, with the simplified rank system that they were using on Enterprise,
But you read Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise before. You probably have it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That explained what every little pin meant. They had a pin that went through the shoulder. There was a little thing that came over. Remember
the Casimir? That was the Bible to them on how.
Yeah, those pin uniforms.
Yeah.
I got pictures of them with all the pin. Didn't you have a pin uniform once with those pins in it?
They used that book as the basis for how they were going. Everybody had to wear rank because it also had the ranks for all the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers.
Right, like the petty people and stuff like that. The petty officers, yeah.
Yeah. So all those people who weren't officers had to wear the same.
Yeah, I never saw those people in that club wear anything but those Wrath of Khan era stuff.
Yeah, nobody wanted to wear any of the other.
I think there was some TOS era people that wore TOS stuff there.
Well, yeah, they were more of the original series and movie era fans and stuff.
But then after a while, it's like everything was about the pins.
Yeah. Well, there was a lady in Bangor that used to make all their uniforms. She has the pattern, and they would just.
You used to be able to order patterns for those things and make them. Yeah.
Yeah, and they would buy the material and they would bring it to her and say, "Make up a uniform for me," and she'd measure them out and everything, and then she'd sew it up for them.
Because you remember I think you have a picture that you took somewhere. I remember seeing it years ago, where you're dressed in a uniform like that, posed with it looks like people from the Shatner and them.
Yeah.
Was that like a cardboard stand-up or?
No, what it was is actually we can do that with modern computers today. But what they did, this was back in the '90s. I went out to Universal Studios.
Oh, the Star Trek. Was it the Star Trek Adventure?
No, this was before that. This was when they were still doing the Back to the Future rides over there. I went over there. They had a place where they could do photographs. And what they do is they take a picture of you by yourself in front of a green screen wearing a uniform, and then they superimpose your image over a poster that they had. They took Leonard Nimoy's Spock character out, and they put me in his place. And then they would write at the bottom, it says, "Who needs Spock with so-and-so on board?"
Well, I never saw that part. I just saw you in the picture. I didn't know that there was a caption on the bottom. It was kind of a novelty.
Yeah, I got the picture. What it is it's just it's just we can do that with computers today. All you
like Photoshop, yeah.
Yeah, it's really simple to do it now. But back then, I had paid $60 for that damn picture.
Well, like I said, I remember seeing pictures of the Casmar people with I remember Kirk had that thing where you'd take it out and there'd be this big white thing, like a big white part of it. Like you open up the uniform and there'd be like a big white.
Yeah, when you'd open it up. And there was
this is going to be weird. When I was younger, I thought that was a bib.
It does look like a bib.
I thought, this is how I eat.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean,
that was a weird affectation to me. It just was like.
It was a very, very weird outfit to wear for something that you would see in space. I mean, it looked too conventional, too modern. Like you would see something in modern day military wearing something similar to that.
Not as many pins. I don't know about that.
In the Civil War, the British wore uniforms that kind of were like red like that with lots of pins and buttons on the front, and it had folds sort of like that. And it kind of reminded me of that. They had the belt that went around the waist like that, and it was sort of like that. If you look at some of the pictures of the uniforms that were worn back in those days in the Civil War, and you look at
okay, this ties back into World War III. Now that I think about it, we're kind of talking about the history of war here. So.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the uniform thing. It's funny how we sometimes go from one subject to the other, but they kind of relate.
Yeah.
Like I said, for some reason we had World War III, and you'd think that people on Earth would want to have uniforms that were kind of, more elegant. Like the TOS seemed more like they were these New Frontier kind of things. They were all very bright, and they had these big, the Delta symbol and all that. Well, not everybody had the Delta symbol. Hello. Yeah. But, I mean, that's not Prime, but I'm saying that in those days everybody had a different symbol. And each ship had a different symbol. That was another thing. By Next Generation, the Delta symbol, or by Motion Picture, the Delta symbol was Starfleet symbol or whatever. But still, even in TOS era, I mean the Motion Picture era, even some of the uniforms look like pajamas. The Admiral uniform was pretty cool. I mean, it looked that in Motion Picture looked pretty cool, you know. And then you had the Star Trek 2, and all of a sudden it's like these big. Everybody's just like a big, bulky fleet admiral.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be a good admiral outfit.
And
that bulky
the
thing.
Is that, you know, we recognized the ranks in Star Trek: The Motion Picture because they used the same system in the TOS. But then we go into Star Trek 2, and now everybody's wearing these pins, and everyone's like, "What is that?" You know,
well, I wanted to ask you a question. Weren't there some people in the Wrath of Khan through Star Trek 6 era that had like orange collars and not white ones?
Yeah, those were like departments. Like Sulu, I think, was wearing a sort of a yellowish collar.
Yeah, he was.
Or and McCoy's collar was sort of like a light blue or something like that. So yeah, the collars were like different colors, and you know, I guess that was sort of like the departments. You know, what we saw like in the TOS, where some were red, some were gold, some were blue.
But, you know, my goodness, I think you're right. That Ambassador Fox, that was by far probably the weirdest TOS outfit. It was like a toad. It was a little like a turtle or something.
It's like it's like a teenage mutant ninja turtle.
Yeah, like I'm Ambassador Raphael, dude. You know, cowabunga! I'll bring you pizza down. You know, I mean, that was a Ninja Turtle outfit. It also reminded me of like, what's that movie?
I couldn't say it all. I'm gonna pick you up by the collar and I'm gonna throw you over the airlock.
Your collar, this giant. You know what it also reminded me of? You ever seen? It's not a really good movie. You ever seen that movie, Master of Disguise? Nick Harvey. It's a really tripey kind of Z movie-ish thing. It's famous for him. There's a scene we're supposed to be going to a place called the Turtle Club, so he comes disguised as a human turtle. Okay. And he looked kind of like, you know, Fox. So I expected him to come over and say, "Am I not turtly enough for you?" You know, just he's a turtle. He's like a little turtle man.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and he's an ambassador. He's trying to avert this critical situation. I would think that he would have a more elegant uniform.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I can't think of a futuristic ambassador with a big frog,
this hideous
turtle thing.
Yeah. It had an odd cut at the bottom of the whatever he was.
Yeah, that whole thing was back-asswards. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was some guy's drunken nightmare that he put together, you know, for the guy.
I mean, and people complain about people with go-go dancer outfits on and the way to Eden, whatever that was supposed to be, you know, but I mean, at least those things look sensible for what they were. But that Ambassador Fox, the second ambassador they had, they actually got the look better.
Yeah,
they had a more. Well, there were pins. Wasn't there pins on the second guy in Galileo 7?
I think so. I think he had like they look like triangles or something like that.
Yeah. Well, remember in Star Trek, the dress uniforms. If you see the dress uniforms, they're like more. They kind of look like the JJ era uniforms. They're kind of satiny.
Yeah, they had a gloss to them.
Yeah, they had a shine, and they had these little triangles all over them.
Yeah, I guess they meant something like ribbons or something. I don't know.
I'm just glad they didn't make the dress uniform those giant toad collar things. Could you imagine Spock wearing his giant toad collar?
Well, yeah, they were oddly simplistic compared to what ambassadors were wearing, and you know, in comparison. You know, it just seemed like.
You know, that brings me to Star Trek 2 again. You made this point once to me. Was it me, or did everybody in Star Trek 2 look like they had dress uniforms on?
That's what I was saying. Yeah, those uniforms were way too dressy for a duty uniform. You know.
And they did all these strange things, like having Kirk open it up with that giant white thing in the middle.
Well, here's the thing. Later on, when we with Star Trek 6, when they were still using those uniforms, and they had an official meeting with all the admirals and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The uniforms couldn't look any more dressier than they were. So what did they do? They added ribbons on the uniforms to make them look more official. It's the same.
Oh yeah, what was it you said had with Colonel West? You said had way more stuff than anybody else did.
Yeah, it was the same uniform. They just added more ribbons on it because the dress uniform they didn't have one. It was the same outfit.
And with Colonel West, didn't they add a bunch more pins too?
Yeah. I mean, it was like, you don't wear a dress uniform as a duty uniform. That's why I never liked that.
Well, how is it pronounced? Coilson, or those pins with the little backs? Whatever. But those things, as you said, you try to put them on an average shirt, they drop down.
Yeah, if the thing isn't clamped on it tight enough, they'll pop right out. You won't even know it.
I don't know how on earth those pins stayed on them in those uniforms, because there were so many of them.
The only way, what I used to do with the one that I had, I would take super glue, and I would put the pin on the back with the super glue, and that would just stay there, It would come off.
And we mentioned this before, but I was watching a video the other night on YouTube where they were talking about communicator badges, and they showed that scene in the Enterprise C where he tapped the movie era badge.
Yeah.
So apparently the later gen versions of those were tap communicators.
Yeah.
Unless they just made a mistake and forgot that he was not a next generation guy and they let him tap it.
Yeah. Well, maybe they were trying to show that, there was an advancement a little bit there in the, because the uniform, it wasn't complete. They took the turtleneck under, the sweater out from under it, which made it look sloppy. The jacket without the undershirt, it just looked sloppy. Like somebody's wearing a winter coat, but they ain't got nothing on underneath.
You know what's funny about those uniforms? those Nicholas Meyer era ones, the Khan era ones. When people think of Star Trek, they tend to think of that uniform.
Yeah.
If you see fan art of Trekkies, like cartoons of Trekkies, they're always wearing that with something.
Yeah, and I just wish people would forget about that, because that.
When I think of Star Trek, I either think of the TOS uniforms or the turtleneck TNG ones.
I would rather people remember, the simple uniforms like
the
Next Generation,
like the Next Generation or TOS.
Even Enterprise's uniforms.
Right, those make more sense for their time, but nobody ever made a uniform like those Star Trek 2 ones again.
Yeah.
Even the First Contact ones were gray on top, didn't have pins all over them.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's too dressy. It's too much detail in that. It's not a simplistic duty uniform. They look
like kind of overdressed Napoleonic soldiers.
Yeah.
It had this magisterial quality. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Maybe Meyer's into that. He just wanted his characters to look larger than life somehow.
It just gave it too much of a militaristic look, and it deviated too far away from what Star Trek's all about. And,
when I think about a Khan, too, in the original series, remember Khan it looked kind of like bubble wrap almost, like this yellow bubble wrappy kind of outfit.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell that was.
But it was just like kind of like a jumpsuity thing again, back to the jumpsuits. But then in the motion picture, he had his whole chest exposed. He had this giant, like a rubber wrap Marty McFly vest on.
Yeah.
And they put wires all over his arm.
Yeah, it's like, obviously at some point he got something there that he made into an outfit. I don't know what he did with it.
Well, he's wearing like, first of all, he had this like 2-minute reveal scene where he had to take all this stuff off.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it was like desert wear. He had this thing on his face, all these, like a big face band, and he had this giant wrap on top of his head. But then after that, he takes all this stuff off. He's still got this big vest and his wires and everything. So, I think Star Trek 2, they overdressed a lot of people.
Yeah. It was, like I said, Nick Meyer's approach to Star Trek is like...
And, those spacesuits they wore on SETI Alpha 5 were interesting, but now that I think about it, they also look a little like Tomy robots. It seems like in Star Trek 2, they wanted to make everything kind of bigger.
Now that I think of it, there was one uniform that I did kind of like, was the one that Scotty wore.
You mean the one in engineering with that big white thing on the front?
Well, no, it was a jacket, just a plain jacket, and it had buttons down the front, and it looked sort of off-duty kind of look. It was. You
mean the one he had in Star Trek 3?
Yeah, he was wearing it when he was on the Excelsior.
That wasn't bad.
No, it looked simplistic. It didn't have too many pins on it, and it just had the badge, and and it had one strap that had his rank pin on it, and that was basically it. It's sort of like a. Well,
there was some things that would have made great uniforms in that era. Like I remember Sulu had this like casual shirt that had ruffled front.
Yeah, it was like probably a civilian.
Right, but like I said, Scotty's outfit, a combination of that and Sulu's thing would have been a great uniform for that time.
Yeah.
Rather than these big penny things that have this big white thing that came out and, like I said, the civilian clothes look more casual uniform-like than what they were doing on the...
Yeah. I would have rather, if I could get a uniform made, I'd probably have one like what Scotty was wearing, something like that. And I think actually Kurt was wearing that same one in Star Trek V, if I remember right. Remember when he took it and on his undershirt said "Go climb a mountain," and he was wearing that jacket.
Yeah, he unbuttoned in that white thing. It was like just a casual dress uniform shirt. It was close to what Picard had in season 5.
Yeah, exactly. Like
that would have been better. Like if it had been similar colors, but they had a little more form to it.
Yeah.
And instead of all those pins, and they had like more stripes, like ribbons.
Yeah, I appreciated that look better than the friggin' whatever the hell they had.
The pins. Well, if they really wanted to be weird, they could have just given them all those big amphibious things that Fox had. Yeah. Although, I don't need to scare you, I remember there was a book on Star Trek Phase 2 where it looked like they were going to sort of go that way.
Yeah.
In early Phase 2, they were going to give them these big, giant amphibian collars. And they even said the uniform concept lasted about 3 seconds, and I can see why that didn't work in TOS.
Yeah. I think that there was a lot of uniforms they were going to go with the short sleeve kind of thing.
Because Bones sort of had that sometimes in TOS, didn't he? The short sleeve.
They were going to have the captain would have like a gold short sleeve shirt with just the badge, but it wouldn't have any rank on it. It would just be for the captain to wear. Yeah,
the whole thing was very casual looking.
Yeah.
And it's cool. There were little flaps here. They have little flaps on the bottom of the shirt. And
they were going to look a lot like the TOS uniforms. They were just going to be more,
tie that in with World War III.
Yeah.
If you remember seeing the World War III soldiers, where they had that little thing with whatever they were taking, it came out like on a string or something.
Yeah.
I used to think that this sounds weird, but it was since it was the 80s. I thought they put all these soldiers on crack, basically.
Yeah.
They hype them up with some sort of like hyper stimulant.
It looked like he was wearing, like something made out of, padding from a UPS.
Yeah, you know what that reminded me of? That World War III outfit. It reminded me of an exercise mat.
Yeah, like they just
made an exercise mat into an outfit.
The whole thing, you could drop this guy off a 10-story building, he probably bounced because it was all padded. It was like
it's like they pad everybody up in the future. It was a weird outfit now that I think about it.
Yeah, it covered right around the head. It was just full body kind of look to it, And
but it would be interesting to do a World War III kind of Star Trek story, like you said, and have people. I mean, econ people might look like that, and who knows? They might have had that outfit in different colors too for each coalition.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to mention, this is a really far aside thing before we end this, because I want to end it. We've gone on really long with this one, but it's a big subject, and we had to lighten it up. But anyway, even though we brought it back into it. Tasha Yar came from this colony on, what was the name of that planet again? That colony she came from? I can't remember.
4, was it?
Yeah, you're right. I think it was Chrono 4.
Yeah.
And it was a failed colony, and she talked about gangs and coalitions. I'm wondering, in some weird way, if that colony wasn't really, really old, and if it wasn't founded by, if it wasn't like a planetary Australia, if it wasn't founded by kind of econ people from World War III. It didn't seem like a human colony of 24th century people.
Yeah, I mean, does it say any in Memory Alpha when that colony was founded or whatever?
Well, it's funny. Is usually Tasha Yar. She kind of more complained about it, but you never really heard.
They don't have much detail about that colony.
Yeah, it just said it was a failed Earth colony.
Yeah, and that's it, yeah.
It's just more that Yar came from there. The planet's government apparently started breaking down.
Yeah.
And they gave police powers and everything. But, it would be interesting if they kind of expanded on that in the sense that maybe some of these econ people went, because Australia was a penal colony.
Yeah.
So, it was founded by a penal system. So, I remember that that's where they got Botany Bay from.
That's right.
So, I'm wondering if there weren't some penal deportation planets. I mean, Nimbus 3 appeared that way, but it was once apparently not that way.
Yeah.
It was a system that had broken down, so it might have just been that, but I always speculate.
Well, they did have a planet where they would send mental health patients.
The one with Lord Garth.
Yeah.
So, but yes, so like I said, I don't know, but I always wondered, because after Enterprise, you didn't really hear much about the World War III people, but if you watch Terra Prime, the guy who was, I forget his name, who was made that spaceship on Mars or whatever.
Yeah.
You remember Terra Prime? He was really like a Colonel Green fanboy.
Yeah.
And apparently Colonel Green was like the sort of Hitler. He wanted to divide people up by what he thought they were worthy of.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, you know, and this is just an aside thing. Remember that Star Trek / X-Men comic they had, or that book they had?
Oh, yeah. Was it Next Generation and X-Men or something like that?
Yeah, they didn't do it this way. But what if they'd had the X-Men be like World War III era people? Like maybe some World War III era equivalent of the Augments.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing about Marvel is they have a thing planned out where at the end the only Marvel hero left standing is the Hulk, and they keep coming back to that all the time. That some big war is going to happen, and
you know what they say about Marvel though? There's superhero death and there's real death.
Yeah. I mean,
superheroes don't really die traditionally.
Yeah, but
they just die conveniently.
This looming ending to the Marvel universe where everything is going to die and the only thing left is going to be the Hulk. You know, so I don't know.
We could go into Star Wars, try to do like we're going to destroy the whole Jedi history, whatever.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, like I said, that you know, I would hate to see the next Star Trek movie be like, you know what, the Prime Universe stunk. We got to destroy the whole thing. Nah, I don't want to see that.
I don't know. The last time I heard about the next Star Trek movie, they were going to do something by bringing Kirk's father back or something. So I think it's going to involve some time travel.
Right. I think they wanted to restore the Prime timeline.
If they get the same clowns doing it that they did the last time, the Prime.
Like I said, we're Trek Prime, but you know, I'm thinking of this like, you know, I mean, how are we going to look in the YouTube archives and who knows when? You know that. Oh, yeah, they were the guys that lit the match to bring this whole thing back to the right place. You know, it would be nice.
I mean, so what's Paramount's goal? Are they going to do, like, every movie is going to be a different universe? I mean, is that what they're trying? Because that's what they're doing.
We're Star Trek Prime here, but if we're discussing Star Trek, I have heard, among people much younger than both of us, saying it's the Star Trek multiverse now.
Oh, everything is a multiverse.
And let me tell you, I do not like the term multiverse. It's not a word. It's a made-up thing. Back in the old days, in Star Trek, they would use very scientific phrase, like the idea of a quantum reality, or something like that, or alternate universe. This multiverse thing is like inserting literally where it doesn't belong. It's sloppy.
It's just a slang.
It's a made-up word. Yeah, it's a slang made-up word. So, you know, now you got the Star Trek multiverse. That's not even a thing. What it really is you've got Star Trek done by different people for different reasons. Basically, that's what it comes down to. You know,
what's the point of watching any of these Star Trek movies if nothing matters? I mean, if you're gonna,
it's like is Star Trek like The Simpsons or Family Guy, where it's a totally floating timeline?
Yeah, it's like, who cares if you blow up the Earth? Next movie, the Earth will be back. You know, it's like, well, what the hell's the point of watching this stuff if nothing is of any value? You know,
or you know, I mean, what's it going to be? Star Trek 11? Is that what they're going to call it?
Yeah, I mean, because they blow up Vulcan in one of the movies, and it's like, well, okay, it doesn't matter because we're going to undo all that timeline, and it won't matter, so everything will be back to normal. It's like, well, what the hell you got to sitting on pins and needles, you know, watching these movies and to see how everything is going to end up.
Yeah, they could do it this way. They could just pull a total Dallas. You know, they could have James Kirk as a teenager see his father George come out of the shower.
Yeah.
And say, well, all that stuff about the Klingons and everything, you know, that never happened.
I mean, what would they do? Archer wakes up and everything that we know for the last 50 years was a dream in his head.
Oh, I get it. Like, they wake up and Archer's in the shower. It's like, that never happened.
Yeah. Forget it, folks. Everything.
Oh, hi, Trip. You know.
Was all a dream in Captain Archer's head. We're starting the timeline over from that point.
No, here's the thing, though. Think about it.
Yeah.
Wasn't Archer had the possibility of being like that since Riker recreated him on the holodeck?
Yeah. I mean, that's...
Like, oh, Riker just made up Archer or something.
That's basically what they did at the end of that series. Was like, oh, by the way, everything was just a holodeck. You know?
So maybe Captain Archer was 70 years old and looked nothing like Scott Bakula.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I want to make him look younger and cuter or something like that and more presentable. Maybe T'Pol was about like 800 pounds or something. I don't know. I mean, who knows? They might have just been totally different people.
I mean, it's nice to entertain the idea that there's alternate realities. That's fine. I go with that. But to waste movie after movie after movie.
You know, one trope about Star Trek fans, I'm sure you've noticed this.
Yeah.
Maybe we've even both been guilty of it. Is that the term bad Star Trek episodes often refers to the alternate reality trope.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I don't think it's a bad episode, but a lot of people pick on TNG episodes like Cause and Effect, which is easy because that was obviously like a bottle episode they did with a really low budget.
Yeah.
Like, let's just remake the scene about 3 times slightly different.
Yeah.
You know, I don't mind it too much because it's kind of like a permanent skip, but whatever. At least it evolves as a narrative, or parallels, where the whole idea is just worth seeing all these different ideas. But that's a little more creative.
Yeah.
I mean, you know. And then in Voyager, you hit the jackpot. Wasn't there episodes where people were literally just going to different parts of the ship in different times?
Yeah, there was like bubbles of different pockets of different timelines all working together.
Yeah, Voyager was twisted into bits. Its timeline was fragmented. I'm surprised that ship survived all that.
Yeah, I mean, I got what they were doing.
It was split into a million pieces all the time.
But to the idea that timelines can interact that way, it just seemed out of it didn't seem right. I don't know. I mean, it was an idea, but it wasn't. Well,
I mean, unless Voyager was like Connie, the game with 90 torpedoes. Because I was watching the Changeling the other night, and I noticed they basically zoomed in on Spock. Like, we were hit with the equivalent of 90 photon torpedoes. I always find that interesting. But, you know, it was like we get hit one by one more, it'll damage us beyond repair. But 90. So 91 will kill you, but 90 you can take.
Well, I gotta say this much: the Voyager was just about as tough as the Connie, because, I mean, look, when they took that beating in the Year from Hell there, whatever the hell that episode was. I mean,
all these quantum time things.
They take off into warp, and all the shingles fly off.
Right, and it's like Star Trek 4. Generally, pulling the ship to warp, you see things flying off the back and wires and rocks coming down.
They had holes all over that ship. It was like Swiss cheese.
It's like Sulu. It's like, it'll fly the ship apart. Fly it apart, then, you know. Like, boom, wires will come down, and beautiful boat. We gotta go to warp. Boom, we fly apart. You know.
The bridge looked like it was the inside of a cave. I mean, everything was burnt.
And of course, that scene is just before she blows the ship up with Voyager, and then everything's all right again.
Yeah, I mean.
And I'm thinking, yeah, you don't even know, but a few minutes ago you were living in a cave bridge with wires and rocks everywhere, and the panels coming down.
A pile of junk. I mean, you couldn't even see it. You know, and even after they ran the ship into that time vessel, it didn't even blow up right off. It waited until the cells flew.
You know, it's like Star Trek 4. I remember they're going into slingshot mode, and the panels are falling off.
Yeah.
One panel falls off, and the ground goes blink.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the hole.
You know, here's the weird thing about that. Starfleet's always they always restored that bridge on Vulcan. They didn't do a very good job, did they? This rust bucket with these pieces flying off.
Oh shit!
And it's like, if that was happening in a car, like a real car, yeah. I would say, okay, this stuff's falling apart. Jump out of the car and say, no, now. It's gonna blow. Now, on starting apparently, ship's gonna fall apart on the bridge and they still go warp, like you said.
Yeah.
Boy, just rocks come in wires, and then they clean out the places, little pieces of things flying everywhere, and it's still screenshots around the sun. And they have this dream about them being these CGI heads, and then Kirk is like, oh, braking flares are fired. Yeah. Half the ship just came apart.
Yeah. But it's only the Enterprise D that couldn't take a hit. I mean, it was, you know, one little flaw, and it was a warp core breach. I mean, it was like, geez. I mean,
what happened to 90 photon torpedoes?
Yeah. I mean, if a ship that gets taken out by a bird of prey, I mean, geez, that's pretty bad. I mean,
unless the aliens in the future use these super mega powerful torpedoes that are way more advanced.
I don't know. But
or this is a long shot, unless the energy equivalent of a torpedo is not the same as an actual torpedo. I don't know how that would work. It's a little speculative. some of that stuff in TOS was all kind of a dramatic effect, you know, like
Yeah.
it just sounds good to say 90.
If you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't have really picked up on it. But
like I said, they were developing the lore. I mean, if they kept with that, the Enterprise D should have been practically indestructible.
yeah,
Now, I mean, in TNG, they joke about lasers.
yeah, lasers, yeah.
Yeah. On the other hand, in the original Star Trek, there was implications lasers could still be a threat. Like they use hand lasers in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Wasn't that thing they brought down to the planet to blow up that thing on Talos 4 a laser thing too?
Yeah, apparently it was like something that's what they would have on the ship to use to defend the ship.
Well, on the Next Generation, they would do power transfers to planets, but like to restore energy sources.
Yeah.
But I never heard of them doing a power transfer to create this giant mega weapon.
Yeah, and how would
That was kind of an odd reference.
There was no physical connection between that and the ship, so how would they transfer power to it? You know, it just, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, they did power transfers on Next Generation, but to other energy sources.
Yeah.
Or to other ships. So maybe they could do that, but how could you transfer it into this conveniently placed phaser emitter? Which I don't even know how it got there. I mean, they bring it down in a shuttle, they beam it down. I don't know what that was all about.
Yeah.
But the cage was really the beginning, so the cage is like... There's some things in there that are barely Star Trek. I mean, like, remember Time Warp? You talked about that?
Yeah, the time warp thing, yeah.
Like, how and they keep going on about, we've broken the time barrier, time warp this.
Yeah.
And of course, being it's the first Star Trek, the first lines in it about circuits. You know, they started that whole ballgame rolling with that.
Yeah, and the thing, you know, when, like you said, the time warp, maybe, you know, when he brought that up, he was probably thinking that maybe, you know, it was in reference to them being able to travel through time by using warp drive or something like that. But then you know, later on you see that Kirk and the crew, they did that implosion with the warp nacelles that caused them to go backward in time. You know, well, I guess we're supposed to think that was the first time.
Right, but you know, the cage is a pilot.
Yeah, but then you know, on Enterprise, you see them traveling through time all the time. I mean, it's
yeah, the Daniels thing.
Yeah.
Talk about murky.
Yeah.
But you know, the thing about, we've established that as a time travel literal thing. It's not like Archer's saying, "Okay, Travis, take us our time warp factor 5."
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they could have done that. They could have just had Zefram Cochrane call it a time warp at first.
Yeah.
When he said the time barrier, because, you know, in our lives, like, remember Trelane?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was looking at Earth through a long telescope and seeing events in the past. Because there's that.
Yeah, because light travels.
Right, light travels slower.
Yeah.
Now, perhaps, in some weird way, the early warp drive systems didn't account for that. I don't know how that would have been. Because they seemed to return. It wasn't like Archer returned to Earth in another time.
Yeah. Well, what was that? How Einstein had said that, you know, if you approach the speed of light, time slows or something like that. So when you come back, it's like it's years later or something like that. Even though you've been out for just a year, you come back, it's 10 years later on Earth or something like that. I don't know how that works because I don't know.
Unless in the cage.
Yeah.
He was going by Einstein ideas.
They meant by the time barrier. Maybe they can travel without having that delay in time from where they left. So
did Archer.
Yeah, so that way when they come back, it's almost, you know, it's not 100 years later. It's right around the time when they left. So,
that Jose guy told those people from the Columbia, well, the illusionary people, that our new ships can break the time barrier.
Yeah.
As the old ones couldn't. So, but who knows? When it comes to the cage, it's a pilot. And see, when I was younger, I thought pilots were a first episode of a show, but they're not. Pilots are basically a dummy show. They're a demonstration show. And a lot of time, pilots aren't necessarily aired. There's something to be shown to a network.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. All in the Family had 2 pilots that don't even have the same characters as we saw in the regular show.
You're right. That's right.
So, I mean, the cage was basically marginally related to the rest of TOS until the Menagerie came along and made it canon.
Yeah.
And they included our time warp. Well, since TOS was mostly about circuits, I guess they had to add the circuit thing. Yeah. So, because TOS had a lot of circuit stuff in it, we established, but
they did make the cage canon when they brought that 2-part episode in there, and
the Menagerie, yeah, like I was saying, they made it canon with that. But still, like I said, they, nobody was like, wait a minute, the time warp thing, I don't know. I don't, like I said, I don't know. Maybe in Discovery they're going to call it time warp. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever that's supposed to be. Because now, you're right about the multiverse thing. That just makes it needlessly complicated.
Well, I heard something, because I'm not watching Discovery, but I saw on the internet that they use something called a spore drive or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't watched it enough to know what that is.
Yeah, I don't either. That went right over my head, so I don't know what's going on with that. But
I mean, like I said, somebody has said it well. Some of the new Star Trek seem like generic sci-fi with a Star Trek wrapping over it.
Yeah, well, that's the only way people will take it now. Nobody really wants to do much thinking when they watch science fiction these days. They want it to be, like you said, dystopian and simplistic. Which is why Star Wars is suffering right now for the same reason, is because they can't really make anything that's really that great, because it's all got to be pretty.
Yeah, and the funny thing about Star Wars is people think of it as a grittier show, but it wasn't necessarily dystopian.
No,
the original Star Wars, even the second one, which could have been pretty dire, all had relatively happy endings.
Well, yeah, but there was always this looming war going on in the galaxy that was bringing,
maybe, but like I said, they weren't really leaving out any element of hope.
Yeah.
New hope and everything. There was always this element that evil could be defeated or whatever, and the Beta wasn't invincible.
Yeah.
Now it's like nobody cares. The Jedi is a bunch of crap, and Kylo Ren's going to take over the galaxy. Whatever. It's all very cynical now.
Yeah. And that's the way people want their sci-fi now. It's just the way they'll watch it. They don't care about having that message of hope there at the end. They just want to see destruction and death.
Well, that's probably to be honest with you, that may be a good reason why, like you said, a World War III Star Trek universe story might be good, because it might show how Star Trek came out of a genuine dystopia.
Mm. Yeah.
Because World War III sounds like it created a sort of dystopia, and the only way out was up.
Yeah. Because, the end, World War III would have been the end of an era, which would have been the way humanity was, and the birth of a new era, which is where humanity decides to stop being the way they were and be something different. So that would be a great period to do sort of Star Trek in. It wouldn't be like the Star Trek we know, but it would be part of the timeline of Star Trek.
Right, like a real heavy prequel.
Yeah, you might see some characters, like you said, Colonel Green, some of these other characters from Star Trek could be involved in it. Khan maybe, or something. I don't know. You could
start with Khan.
Yeah, you could start with that. Yeah, but you could see some characters from Star Trek in it. And going through all that period.
And it wouldn't be a big deal, because you could basically set it in an era that looks very much like ours.
Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't be too much technical stuff there.
So, like I said, and it would be interesting to do, but, who knows? There's all these I wasn't sure if the fan film was totally dead because of that whole Axanar thing, but it would be interesting if they could revive it in that kind of way.
Yeah.
Like, rather than do a Star Trek story, do a Star Trek universe set story.
Yeah.
Like, not as a Starfleet Academy thing, but I mean like a World War III epic or something.
I don't know why the hell people are stuck on this Star Trek Academy, thing.
Yeah, Trek 90210, as I call it.
Ever since the 80s, I don't know who the hell come up with this. I think it was Harv Bennett.
Yeah, Harv Bennett, I think, was the one who came up with that.
Yeah, he's the one that started it, and it's stuck with everybody since then. And it's like, I don't even think anybody was really that interested in seeing.
I know Gene wasn't into it.
No, they wanted to do an early young Kirk and all them. Even back then, they wanted to do that, but everyone was like saying, no, we don't want to do that.
Well, I think that was like maybe a money grab too, because remember, like 89, 90-ish, that was when you had shows like Saved by the Bell and 90210, and I think the whole idea was they wanted to do a Star Trek to kind of fit in with that.
What it was, they were worried that the actors were getting too old to play the roles that they were in, and they're trying to think ahead. Well, how can we keep Star Trek going when William Shatner's getting to his 60s, and all the other actors are getting too old to play their roles? And so instead of doing that, they went and did Star Trek: The Next Generation, which thankfully that it picked up and got popular. But if it wasn't been for that, I don't think they probably would have done a Starfleet Academy movie.
Right, but instead they because everybody when the Next Generation came on, they thought Star Trek was about characters, a specific group of characters.
Yeah.
They didn't know if it would work with a new group, and it did.
Yeah.
So that gave it more room for flight because it had that sense of motion.
Yeah. They found out the fans were a little more open-minded about it than they thought.
So anyway, I think at this point we've explored World War III tangibly and very abstractly.
Yeah. Through
its history that's fragmented, through uniforms that were inspired militaristically in Star Trek II, through the movies. We've really taken this where no Star Trek canon story has really gone before. It's gone into this.
Now that's where they could get Nicholas Meyer to do that.
He could deal with that epic war flavor.
He wants to do his doom and gloom kind of stuff. He can go and do this Star Trek, this story that takes place, in the World War III era, to see what went on there. That would be a good spot for him to do because he did World War III as a TV movie there, the day after.
Right, the 1980s interpretation of World War III as being the end of everything.
Yeah, that was one of his first movies he did.
But he could do this as like, well, yeah, don't touch that dial, we're not done yet, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we're not quite licked. But, that would be an interesting thing to kind of, lead it up to First Contact, maybe skip over that somehow and then go to the events after that. Or maybe do a movie about World War III, then do a post-atomic horror follow-up.
Yeah.
Kind of explore the universe prior to Zephyr Cochrane, then prior to Enterprise.
Yeah, just kind of make it connect right up to the Enterprise.
Like a couple of movies maybe or something. But yeah, so World War III is a topic, but like I said, maybe Star Trek's afraid to be thoughtful now.
It is.
And one thing I hear a lot of people call movies, I'm sure you've heard it, is smart. Now, smart sounds very nice, and I suppose, but being smart and being thoughtful are often two very different things. You can sound smart, but say virtually nothing. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to use this trope again. It's probably never going to go away. It's probably viral. But if somebody doesn't know what Gene Roddenberry's intent was, Detector Circuit could sound thoughtful. I mean, it could sound smart. Yeah. But it's not very thoughtful. Since Star Trek uses sensors, not detector circuits. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a smart-ish sounding thing. So basically saying something is smart could say we can say whatever we want because it sounds smart. Yeah. But being thoughtful, you have to abstract a little bit. Yeah. And, Star Trek was good at that, even with all its little foibles and errors that we joke about and talk about. We're not tuning in just to make fun of this thing. We aren't. I'm not. Anyway, it's just, we like you said, as fans, we see things that we want, we joke about or we criticize because we want this show to be the best it can. Yeah. And part of that is reflecting, and that's part of Star Trek. I wanted to mention this because I didn't like Shatner doing this. Do you remember when he put out William Shatner's Star Trek Memories? It was a documentary on TOS in the 90s, a VHS documentary.
They made a ton of friggin' documentaries.
It was a big one. It was advertised in all the VHSs that came out. It was.
I think I might have seen it. I don't know.
It was based on one of his books, is what it was. Anyway, okay. Remember he wrote all those books?
Again, they did so much about what happened in the series and in the movies. I mean, anyway, everybody had a book.
He did this, and in the beginning, he was saying something to the effect that, we created Star Trek to mirror the times we lived in, and it was only for the agenda of drawing you into the show each week. And I found that very bratty, because essentially he was saying the only reason that Gene Roddenberry made the show thoughtful science fiction was as an audience grab. And
no,
I know, but I didn't like Shatner saying that. It just bothered me. And
that was the appeal of the show.
Exactly. I didn't see it as an audience grab. That was just Shatner being cynical, I think.
The audience grab was the glitz and glamour and, the special effects. But there was a message that that was there that it's like, oh, wait a minute. They just said something. And and now.
Yeah, it wasn't just a way to get the audience to watch it. That was, the like I said, the wagon train to the stars element. And I suppose maybe at that time, even Shatner, as Kirk, with all this. You know, all that, the fighting mechanic he had.
Yeah.
That was all the way to draw in the Western crowd, but the main point of the show was a thoughtful allegory on future fiction.
Yeah.
That's what it was. He was doing it through these little guises.
Yeah.
So, and Shannon made it sound like, oh, this is just a fun show, and we use all this stuff to draw you in.
Yeah, well, you know, I always knew that about him, that the way he looked at Star Trek was way different than how Roddenberry looked
and,
at
it. That's almost Harlan Ellison-like, isn't it?
He looked at it differently. You know, it's it comes through loud and clear when you watch Star Trek V, because he directed it, and if you get to see through that movie exactly how Shatner sees Star Trek, essentially, that's how he sees it right there. So it's spilled right out in every detail, just exactly how he.
You mean just glitz? He saw it as just straight glitz.
Yeah, he just thinks it's like fun and games, you know, kids stuff, and you know, it's just science fiction-y action. You know, it doesn't have a message that's really that important, and it just, you know, it's just there. You know, that's the way he sees it. You know, and it's sad that after all these years that he played Captain Kirk, that all he got out of it was that. You know, and I guess he was the kind of actor that only showed up to work because he was going to get paid. You know, and he didn't really, you know, do it.
I don't know. Nimoy seemed to be very invested in Star Trek, and it seemed to have changed him. He said that playing Spock helped him be more centered and more logical.
He's more thoughtful an actor than most actors.
Right, and maybe he already kind of understood what was going on here, but he saw Gene's message as relevant and saw what the show was, and he never claimed it was an audience grab. His whole thing was that, all that, he'd often say, oh, well, you tuned into the fun and the science fiction, but there was something underneath that was important.
Yeah.
Shatner was always like, oh, yeah, all the social stuff was the stuff on top of the action, what it was all about. It was just all about fun. It wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
He called it a lark once, if I recall. It was a lark I did for a few years. Yeah. He didn't take it all that seriously, I don't think.
Yeah.
Where Nimoy's like, it changed me, it altered my perception. I wrote books about how I wasn't Spock because I was so identified with that character. It changed Nimoy's life, better or for worse.
Yeah.
With Shatner, it was like, it's another job to me. Was that the impression you got?
Yeah, I mean, because he, you know, you see that he acted in a lot of other stuff before Star Trek, and I think he just saw Star Trek as sort of like, you know, like a Twilight Zone episode or something, you know, just that was going to be there, and then he'd move on to another job later on, and he wasn't really invested in it.
It's a workaday thing.
Yeah. It was just, you know, he probably didn't even think that anybody was even really watching it because of the ratings. He would probably read that in the magazine, but, you know, he was going to keep working until they fired him. So, you know, he didn't care. I don't think he really cared that much about it. I mean, he got it later on from some of the other actors, how they felt about it. And
I don't remember where it was, but I read a blog once years ago. I used to read a lot of Star Trek blogs. I don't know if you read them that much or watch videos, but I used to read a lot of them when I was writing. You remember the Star Trek blog I had on Blogger, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm still writing that. But actually, to be honest with you, I kind of want to move a lot of my ideas over from that blog to this one. For example, you mentioned doing character sketches on here, just if we run out of specific ideas. That was a big thing with my blog, doing character sketches.
Yeah.
So I want to bring that, like you said, I want to bring that idea based on your suggestion totally over to this.
Yeah.
And, you know, it could be anything. It could be a character as far back as Colonel Green. It could be a character like Zephyr Cochrane. It could be, who's that guy that they had multiple copies of from the 29th century? Captain Braxton.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't they have multiple copies of him for some reason? I didn't.
Different timelines. It was a Captain Braxton from different timelines.
Yeah, that was a little murky, but anyway.
Yeah.
we could do a character sketch, maybe. You know, and that would be like, the 5 Captain Braxtons. What happened? You know, I mean, it just anybody. It could be anybody. It doesn't have to be like. I don't know if you've seen this, and I've read this about fandom, but some Star Trek fans, when they write Star Trek stories, I ran into this myself. They'll tend to want every character in the future to have some genetic relation to another Star Trek character. Like, this is Kirk's third progeny, or this is Jean-Luc Picard the 5th.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's like no creative thought, just like, we'll just recreate characters.
Yeah. That's kind of like what they were doing with Discovery, you know, with bringing another sibling of the Spock family on there, or an adopted sibling, or whatever they...
Right, as if Zybok wasn't enough.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's like it's a fan. Oh, hey fans, take a look at this. We got a connection to this famous character. You got to tune in and watch.
I mean, when they did Next Generation, they brought Bones in, but they really brought Bones in. They didn't bring in Leonard McCoy the Ninth.
Yeah.
They brought in Spock, but
it's a big role. He was just in it for a minute.
Yeah, and it was just basically like, yeah, this is Star Trek. Bones is here, and he hasn't died at 103 or whatever.
Yeah, the focus of the episode wasn't just about him. It was just I don't even think they advertised it that he was actually going to appear in the.
Yeah, he was a cameo.
Yeah, I mean, it surprised me that he was there because I didn't know he was going to be on there, the cameo role. I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's Dr. McCoy, because he was all make-upped up, he looked old, but his voice gave him away, because when I heard him talk, that's DeForest, so yeah, I mean, it was, they do that, but I mean, later on they brought in Spock, but they did it in such a way that they didn't make it so the whole thing was just about Spock and everybody should watch because of that.
Right. Well, in the preview for Unification, Spock was kind of the main draw.
Yeah.
Because I remember watching it, and they didn't say, because how in the previews they'd always say, the Next Generation would always kind of preface the episode. Like they'd say, mind control or terrorism next week on Star Trek The Next Generation. Unification was Spock next week on The Next Generation.
Yeah, but at the
they
same
mentioned
time,
Spock as the main draw.
Trying to lay it like they were trying to develop the Romulan.
Right, well, in the episode, yeah, but the draw for it was Spock in the beginning. They were trying to bring that into it. But Spock was not, to be honest, Unification didn't have to really have him in it.
Yeah, he didn't show up till in the first part.
Right, that could have been another character. It didn't need to be Spock per se.
Yeah, he didn't have the role until the second part of the episode. But it was all about basic. I mean, the thing was basically they were trying to do something about Romulus, and then the Unification thing that really kind of laid the groundwork that they kept picking up later on in other spin-off series. Okay,
well, I predicted it, and I'm glad we did this. This World War III subject opened up. I'm finding this on every one we do. We start with one subject, and it just opens into this huge thing. But World War III is kind of a huge thing, isn't it? Because it's almost like Genesis device, isn't it? It blew up our whole world and gave birth to the new one.
Yeah, because everything's detailed, it's all connected, and
Although they always put it in very magisterial terms, like we had this war and everything just went. But I don't think anybody said, okay, World War III is over, boom, the planet's nice again. I don't think it happened that way.
No.
I think humanity had to redefine a lot of things about itself.
Yeah.
And this may sound like my head's in the clouds, but I'm just going to say this. I'm seeing signs around me now that, we may not need a World War III to have to get to that. I mean, there are signs now where people are kind of getting tired of things being this way, and, it could just happen organically. I'm hoping it does. But, I don't see the future as a dystopian thing, and, maybe the presence of World War III in the Star Trek context prevented and will prevent a real event like that from happening.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not shy about saying that. Star Trek, in a lot of ways, has taught me about having optimism in the future. Do I sound like Dr. Phlox when I say that?
Sort of, yeah.
I don't have that bizarre Grinch. Remember you had that Grinch smile?
Yeah, that goes.
yeah, that Grinch. Is it me or do they make Phlox really strange looking for no reason?
I don't know. It's like he's got a rubbery face, I think. Does he get
they do is they make him these Grinch smiles and these big blowfish expressions. Like they were the way to make him super alien.
Yeah, it's like that figure where they can stretch right out.
Like Armstrong or something.
Yeah.
Like maybe he's Plastic Man or something. I don't know. He always seems like they can't do the I mean, to be honest, Phlox used to remind me of, I don't know if you remember them. They were very silly Warner Brothers cartoon characters from the 90s, the Animaniacs, who seemed to be able. And he used to have this expression called a gookie, where your face would look all like Phlox. And I thought, is he making gookies up there? It's all these weird cartoon expressions. They made him a very cartoonish alien. They had the Vulcans as these stolid, political figures, and Phlox is a doctor and obviously quite bright. Yet he goes into hibernation, has these weird events. He has all these
He's got weird toenails.
You know something? Note to self: let's do a character sketch on Dr. Phlox.
Yeah,
he's an enigma wrapped in a bunch of other things. If it had gone on, I mean, who knows what would have happened? I mean,
this traveling zoo. Remember when he had all those backpacks and everything?
Oh yes, he had all those creatures in the sick bay.
God, he had to have a place for all his pets there in that warp nacelle that they were all camped out in.
He's nothing like any other Star Trek character I've really ever seen, even Alien. Just they made him really alien.
Yeah, they did. And he was
really
weird.
And we never heard of the Noblians before. They were just like some random race inserted.
Yeah.
You know? But as I say optimism, I just think of that Phlox smile.
Yeah, like they all go like, oh, what the heck? You know, how does he do it? You know?
But when I said optimism, I really mean it. In my case, you know, like I said, it makes me sad in some ways to see young people watching sci-fi today and coming out of it like, who cares about the future?
Yeah.
You know, I hear a lot of people saying that I'm going to kind of look at myself for the now, that's all I've got. And, you know, that's a throwback thing, isn't it? Because that's kind of what happened in the 60s. You know, people didn't think they'd live till they were 30.
Yeah.
So, you know, they mentioned that with Gary Seven, that a lot of people just took a lot of risk with their lives because, you know, whether it be drugs or joining bike gangs or whatever they were doing, because they didn't think they'd have a life to live.
Yeah.
And, you know, now it's not that people are taking risks, they just don't care. And I don't think it's that things are that bad. I just think the media isn't projecting an attitude of caring in the terms of its media. And, you know, I think Star Trek, you know, you can't tell me the Star Trek didn't inspire some good things.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can't. So
you don't see the, you know, the people reaching for something better anymore. You know, even with the, you know, the young generation that's out there now, they seem to be like, they're just settling for what's there. They settle for less. You know, they're not trying to, you know, reach, set a goal to reach to. They just, you know, well, I'll just spend the rest of my life playing video games, you know, and that's it. You know, I'm not.
Or either that, or they just said, you know, we'll live enough to pay the bills. You know, they're not thinking of the fact that, you know, they're not, I don't really,
nobody's out there saying, what kind of business can I start? You know, maybe I could start some kind of a thing, you know, make a.
Or that, or somebody. I mean, now I hear once in a while, you know, we've discussed the robot issue, where people just basically put a bunch of algorithmic devices on a mannequin and say the future's here.
Yeah.
You know, futurism has become very kind of deadbeat and dull.
It doesn't seem like it's like, well, it's such a big advancement, you know.
So, you know, I think I am seeing one thing good, though. I mean, the sci-fi media is really not in a good place right now, but to be honest, you know, I remember, I don't know if you're a little too young for this, but I remember hearing, like, my parents and people older than me saying we shouldn't go out into space at all until we solve our problems here. I heard that a lot.
Patrick Stewart said as much the same once they asked him that, you know.
Yeah, and that seemed to be a 70s, 60s era thing, and they talked about that during the Apollo project, that we shouldn't be putting people on the moon until we can solve problems.
The reason why people say that is they're looking at the value, the money value of it. To, you know, to take all your money and
right, that's a business thing.
When you could take the money and help people that are struggling.
Right, that's rooted in business. So
yeah. So in a way,
well, not money than business.
It makes sense that way if you look at it that way. But
it's mostly financial.
Can't we do both? I mean, we're multitasking people. We can't do both.
That, and you know, I told somebody once who kind of came at me with that idea. They weren't necessarily espousing it. I said, we have Earth Day, right? And they said, oh, yeah. And I said, what do you think inspired Earth Day? I think it was Apollo 9, Apollo 10 took that famous photo called Earthrise.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have been an Earth Day if it wasn't for that photo. I mean, imagine you're seeing your own planet looking back at you with your own eyes. That's going to change your perspective. So you can't tell me space travel didn't influence good things.
Yeah.
The whole cause of environment, we wouldn't have cared about global warming probably for anything if it hadn't been for that. Yeah. I mean, nobody before space travel really talked about pollution or taking care of the planet. That I think derived from Earthrise, the whole space thing, that we're not the center of the universe.
Well, we saw that our planet really isn't as big as we think it is. You know, we think it's endless when we look out the horizon, you know, but it isn't endless. It's small. I mean, in the scheme of things, it is.
Right, exactly. So space is not important. It's very important because, you know, a lot of things we are upset about now is because of a form of human arrogance.
Yeah.
Just like I said, thinking with this huge thing.
The 70% of the budget that we spend in military warfare and stuff is a waste of money right there in itself. If you want to talk about wasting potential, human potential, that's the waste right there.
Well, that goes back into World War III. You know, that actually ties right back in because, you know, they still use money in that time. So you assume that, you know, again, we could go into World War III with that. Maybe by blowing up the planet, they just trash the economy doing that.
Yeah.
I mean,
like I said, you can ruin humanity with just that, spending all its resources on warfare. But if you spend half of that, just half of what we spent on our United States budget for the military, and you invest it in, you know, taking care of people, the poor people, and then, like you said, putting some into like space travel or something like that, we'd be making all kinds of historical landmarks.
That woman who died, first woman astronaut in this country, Sally Ride, she had a commission where she specifically thought that there should be a NASA initiative to monitor pollution and climate change on Earth back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a great idea. Nobody wanted to put a budget for it. But, I mean, that's a very Star Trek-y initiative, though.
Nobody really gave a shit back then, you know, about stuff like that, because everybody was all worried about the Iron Curtain, you know,
the Cold War kind of ebbing at that point, and
everybody was living on pins and needles during the 80s that the bomb was going to land on us in the middle.
Yeah, like I said, I know that was my monster under my bed.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I'm going to get to the root of this World War I thing where I close this up, because I know that we've gone on longer than we wanted to, but I'm glad we did, because this is a subject that really, you know, we're going to learn a lot about how we feel about Star Trek through this, aren't we? This is going to be a big thing, so I can see that, because, you know, our blog started at half an hour, they're evolving into 3-hour things, so they're getting big. But anyway, you know, I talk to my parents now, you know, and they grew up during the duck and cover era. And they're almost joking about it. They're like, oh, come on, there's never going to be anything like that. What were you worried about? And I'm like, well, I'll put it this way. Did anybody, when you were younger, write in school about what life would be like if they grew up? Yeah. I heard 7-year-olds saying that when I was 7. Yeah, that was a monster under my bed for sure. Yeah. When you hear the word if and grow up, yeah, that does something to you from a little kid. Because, I mean, I wasn't saying that to myself. I heard other people saying it around me. So then I watched this Star Trek thing, and they talk about having a third world war if they're still there and they're thriving. So I'm like, oh, there's another way to look at this. That we could learn from something that terrible. Or even better, that we could learn from seeing it through that, and that it doesn't have to happen at all.
That's right.
So, like I said, I think World War III in Star Trek might be very significant. Because, like I said, Nicholas Meyer did The Day After, which was our more cynical interpretation that World War III is the end of all things, the end. Or, you know, just the notion of World War III meaning the end. But in Star Trek, it meant the end of an old philosophy, an old way of doing things.
Yeah.
Because you notice, as soon as World War III ended in the Star Trek universe, the Star Trek universe as we know it evolved almost immediately. You had warp drive right off the bat.
Yep.
I take it, after that, the economy gradually just whittled away and became this post-scarcity thing they ended up with.
I think people just said, the heck with an economy. We don't need it. You know, we'll just, like you said, we'll come up with some kind of resource-based economy, and that's it, you know.
Right, the post-scarcity thing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they on Enterprise, they discussed that in their time, they recycled everything on the ship.
Yeah.
So, you know, who knows? Maybe after World War III, they had massive recycling initiatives. You know, there wasn't a lot of plans to construct things. I mean, I imagine a lot of the old factories were first target areas.
Yeah.
So I imagine the industrial base had to come from recycling.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, who knows? People might have been driving around in cars that were, you know, Edsel bumpers with Cadillac bodies with wheels by Chrysler. You know, it could have been very steampunkish at first. But, you know, if you evolve from that, you have these reclamators they use on Enterprise. Although there was a joke the other night where they were talking about, remember that scene where they were talking to an Enterprise to Earth about what, somebody asked, what do you do with your waste? And Trip's like, how do I? And he says, we recycle everything.
Yeah.
And then they in this video they pan to a picture of Trip eating a piece of pie.
Yeah.
It's like recycling waste, and I'm thinking, is that what you're gleaning from this?
Yeah.
That they convert their waste into food.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty funny when they did that.
I mean, but there was a video where they inserted him eating a piece of pie and had that waste speech, because the speech almost implied that we're actually eating our own excrement here. But I mean, I mean that goes with real space though, because they do recycle certain things on especially on the Russian space stations.
Yeah,
they're recycling urine and water and stuff.
Yeah,
that is kind of logical. They might do that, but I mean, who knows? I mean, remember the bathroom that we don't see on the Enterprise D? That might go right to the replicator. Not very pleasant to think about, but hey, remember too, also, in the future, they may not get grossed out as easy as us. And that's funny about us humans. We're in the 21st century.
We can look back in the past and see how we handled, sewage back in the old days when there were no sewage systems. People would just throw stuff right out the window, and that was considered fine. They'd take bedpans and they'd dump it right out the window.
Yeah, you mean like back in the days where they had the miasmas?
Yeah, and then people were just that to them that was normal. They didn't think anything of it. Today we'd say you people are crazy because you're going to get all kinds of diseases and everything. But back in those days, it was common to see somebody throw a
right. Like in the old West, people would dump chamber pots out the door, and or one of those spittoons.
Yeah,
they didn't have. They didn't exactly have Dodge recycling programs.
No, there was none of that stuff.
I mean, if you look at public sanitation history, by today's standards, New York was an unlivable mess in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
And when they picked up the horse manure, where did it go? A pile somewhere, maybe the farms.
They'd shovel it up, and that was it. But it would be out on the street for days, until somebody came by and picked it up.
Right. So you got to figure if we had improvements since then in the Star Trek universe, everything could be recycled and reclaimed.
Yeah, it's a whole different thought process.
So, like I said, maybe that's how they got rid of the economy. If they figured, okay, the economy is just that we have is just keeping products made until they just overtake the planet.
Yeah.
What if we just recycled everything?
Yeah.
I mean, everything. And it just became part of the culture. Nobody even thought about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about recycling now, and it's very primitive, but in the Star Trek universe, didn't they actually have a thing where Janeway put something she didn't want in the replicator and said recycle?
Yeah. like you said, if they learn how to recycle things, then there's no point in buying anything because you can just make it.
So like I said, it's a post-scarcity world.
Exactly.
Where you're recycling everything, and there's no need to have this market-driven economy where everything has to be bought and sold.
Yeah. Because you're using a few resources.
Which is why it's not communism, because it's a different technology.
Yeah.
There's no collective farms in the Star Trek universe. It's not like that. It's more that, they just recycle things.
Yeah. I mean, there's people, that still like to farm and stuff like that, and even in the 24th century, because they keep saying they prefer the realistic things instead of the...
Well, right, but that's all part of this. We're living to self-improve ourselves. We're not living to accumulate all this stuff so much.
Yeah.
Which leads to the communist accusation that this is all a planned economy. It isn't. I think it's just a post-scarcity thing where it's more about self-discipline and recycling. I
challenge anyone that thinks they have to go to Russia or China and see if they're doing that over there.
Yeah. I mean, that's not the Star Trek universe. That's a whole different thing.
They're not recycling any more than we are in these other countries, okay?
I mean, like I said, Star Trek communism is all about heavy industrial base. The Star Trek universe, they kind of recycle their industry.
Yeah.
I mean, look with starships. I mean, suppose they have a starship that's just kind of all old and naughty. They might recycle all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we have a piece of an old Centaur class ship. Let's make a Galaxy class ship out of that stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, I just think they just recycle things.
Yeah, I mean, if they can beam somebody from one point to another, then they can break anything down to its molecular structure and reconfigure it into whatever they need it for.
So you have the invention of the pattern reclamator, the transporter.
Yeah.
Do you think replicators are kind of semi-transporters anyway?
Yeah, in a way.
Because the food kind of beams in, or whatever you're making kind of beams in.
I think what I understand is they'll take inert matter and just transform it into whatever somebody needs it for.
Right, but like I said, who knows? That's where the waste may go. The waste may become part of that inert matter.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Who knows? The toilets of the future might actually beam stuff out.
Yeah.
Like, we never seen a 24th century toilet, but you may sit in a small transporter. Like, you know, you do your business and beams up into this inert matter thing, and the next minute you got cheesecake.
Yeah.
I know it sounds disgusting to us, but hey, if that's the way the future works, I don't think it's a problem. And they don't even think about it. It's like
there's a lot of things that we do that's pretty disgusting, but we don't think about it, so we can do it. You know, I mean, we kill animals so we can eat them. And then
right, and in the Star Trek universe, they talk about them not enslaving animals for human eating purposes anymore.
In the future, that doesn't mean they're vegetarian. It means they don't slaughter animals to get their meat. It means they
replicate it.
They replicate it. That's right.
So, like I said, I think it's just the community recycles all its resources. They don't. Yeah. They don't have to worry about a scarcity situation. Yeah. So they can have the advantage of farming a limited supply for those who kind of maybe want a nostalgia trip.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, some of these vineyards where they operate don't need to operate that way anymore, technologically, but they still like the old flavor of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at Picard's family vineyard. I mean, they operate by standards similar to ours. Yeah. But I think it's more like a choice thing, like this is just an old tradition.
Well, it's sort of like the farmer's market thing. You know, you can either buy your food at this grocery store, or you can get it at the farmer's
right, because remember, Picard's brother could tell it has been replicated wine and his own stuff.
Yeah, he can tell the difference, yeah.
Or synthahol, I guess they call it.
Yeah.
But remember, they can replicate real wine, too.
Yeah.
I mean, real wine. They don't replicate just the fake stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, remember Worf replicated that stuff with the smoke coming out of it? What was that, Klingon fire wine?
Yeah. Fire wine.
Remember, he ordered that in the Western episode.
I just picture the stuff coming out and there's fire coming out of it.
Well, remember he went to the saloon in the West and said, I want Klingon fire wine?
Why does everything with the Klingons have to be so violent? You know, it's like,
yeah, like, it's like a flaming, like, torch.
And yeah, it's like the food they eat is still alive and they're going to wrestle to the table.
Yes, I mean, I wonder how a Klingon dinner works out. What do you go with your mek'leth and say, I'm going to slaughter a targ, get my arm eaten off, and then bring the targ home and tan it, and then cut it and put it on the table, and then I have to set my wine on fire, smoke coming out of it, and then we can eat.
God, talk about
and then you wrestle a jellyfish to get stung 1,000 times and bear the pain, and then bring it home for you to eat.
God. Yeah, holy jeez.
And then I got to go into a cave 100 meters long and pick out these serpent worms and make them into God. The Klingons seem to have to make everything dramatic and huge.
They're trying to wrestle it back on the plate.
I mean, I would hate to see what a traditional Klingon family meal is like. They probably have to go out and freaking go through this battle with the food and like freaking battle the wine and they love this pageantry, you know.
Yeah, boy, they had some weird names for stuff. Fire wine. Oh God.
Well, they had blood wine. I don't know if that was really blood.
Yeah, it's some kind of drink.
But it's almost like whoever did the Klingon stuff is like, just figure out a violent warrior sounding name for everything.
Yeah, the smallest thing has to do with violence. Even just, you know.
Like I said, it can't be just Klingon spirits. It's Klingon fire spirits, sir.
Yeah. It's got to do with some kind of destruction or something like that. God.
You think they kind of did some of that sometimes?
What are they, little kids? They grow up, they play with bombs or something. You know,
well, we know, for one thing, the Klingons, when they're like 7, they're given these bat-lefts.
Yeah, they're taught how to fight with a sword when they're just barely out
my friend Henrique, I mean, I think he mentioned to me once that he found a lot of similarities in Klingon and old samurai culture.
Yeah.
Because in samurai culture, you're teaching kids from a really young age how to fight with these samurai swords. And, with Klingons, I mean, Alexander's like in first grade and Worf's ready to hand him this giant knife. And it's like the knife's bigger than he is.
Yeah, friggin' Batleth was like 6 feet taller than him, the little kid. I mean, Jesus, you know.
So, so like Klingons, they teach the kids these warrior codes early on. They don't just drink wine; they drink fire wine. One of my favorite lines in Star Trek, and my father actually, he has to drink prune juice to keep himself regular.
Yeah.
I told him about this. Remember when Guinan gives it to Worf to try, and he drinks prune juice and says, "This is a warrior's drink."
Yeah, that was more of a slam to anyone that drinks prune juice.
Right? What's a warrior's drink?
Yeah. I mean, if he likes it, then why?
No, wait a minute. Maybe Wolf would call it Klingon fire prune juice.
Yeah.
Or Klingon flame, or Klingon bomb juice, or whatever. I don't know. It's some violent name, or Klingon warrior or something. I mean, this is a warrior's drink. Like, everything has to be some big deal with him.
Yeah. Yeah, everything had to have some kind of purpose, that had to deal with fire and then testing your moral.
And I always found it funny when Worf said, "This is a warrior's drink." Like, you have to be a Klingon warrior to endure eating this. Like you said, drinking this stuff,
Oh,
I mean, Klingon, I get the impression Klingon food and drink is all really super pungent.
Yeah.
Because everything with Klingons is a test of your strength.
Yeah, you're constantly. Remember when they would go down that? You would go down that gauntlet and then they would stab them with these stupid sticks.
Sticks, the giant. Yeah. The Klingon paintings, they had no real purpose. They couldn't. Well, Brian said they used as a weapon once, but
yeah,
they really just sort of. It was just the rage of ascension. That's what that was.
Yeah,
where he was uttering what appeared to be a lot of Klingon gibberish. I don't even know if that was real Klingon. That's weird.
I'd hate to be a kid having to grow up and as a Klingon because you always got something to dread down the road. I mean, you're always going to get beat up or shot or some damn thing.
Yeah, I mean, the Klingons, they did do some warrior stuff, but mostly it was all pageantry after a certain point. They just kind of got that way. But, one thing I just wanted to mention before, another thing before we get out of here is that I noticed the Vulcans were treated in a similar way. They were very logical and practical, and they kind of gave you the impression, well, Vulcan would think of food only as sustenance. So when you hear Vulcan food, they always imply it tastes like polymer.
Yeah.
Like it has no flavor, like it's bland, just basic nutrition.
Yeah.
I mean
I don't think that would be necessary because they always say we experience emotions, we don't show it. So they would appreciate something that tasted nice or something like that. They wouldn't just say, "Oh wow, this is," they would just keep it to the.
Yeah, I don't know why they imply Vulcan food is always so bland.
Yeah, that doesn't. It's like an over the top kind of thing with the
either or proposition. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, apparently it's like apparently the Bajorans all eat Tex-Mex.
Yeah.
They have their little burritos and basically I remember those ones where they had these Bajoran fajita-like things.
Yeah.
So basically they eat Tex-Mex. I guess like Hospital is a little burrito, so that's that's their thing. The Ferengi are kind of New Guinea because they're into grubs.
Yeah, they like bugs. They like eating bugs or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes because the way their bodies are built. I wonder if Ferengis are related to amphibians.
Yeah.
The planet's really rainy and really gloomy.
I always thought it was raining because they ruin their environment. Because of their greed.
You think maybe that's what happened, or do you think that like it's acid rain? Because I'm wondering the Ferengi always have short amphibious qualities.
Yeah. They probably were like that to start with, but I think their planet is just murky like that because of the way they industrialized it and ruined
right, because they're supposed to represent current humans.
Yeah, they're just trying to show, hey humans, this is what your planet can look like if you keep going the way you're going, Yeah,
the idea that really was to enter any building, you have to put a little coin in, that they do that whole thing.
Yeah, everything is money.
But, like I said, when you mentioned World War III, I guess, you mentioned all the things the Star Trek universe got rid of that we have. The greed, and when you get rid of the whole New World economy, Troy said poverty was eliminated.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, because if you have a post-scarcity economy, poverty, what's that?
Well, everybody's up on the same level now.
And that could be why people equate Star Trek with communism, but they're actually saying, no, that was communist propaganda. That actually isn't what it was. So, when you go to, Star Trek universe, they actually did do that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't through the same means.
Yeah.
I mean, how many political systems in history have promised to set people free and not actually done it?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, when I look at Star Trek, it's very literal democracy in a lot of ways. I mean, very literal.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a federation of planets. I mean, isn't that almost like a very advanced United Nations anyway?
Yeah, it's just, like a science fiction.
I mean, as it is, I always found it cute that when Gene Roddenberry remade the Federation symbol for the motion picture, he made it a very elaborate UN symbol.
Yeah.
I would say the UN kind of evolved into this.
Yeah.
Because you had the new United Nations, which got abolished during the Third War, back to the Third War again. Then you had that thing with the United Earth, I guess.
Yeah.
This world government thing. So, World War III just blew the box out of our world and created this new thing.
Yeah.
But apparently, humanity survived. The Golden Gate Bridge is still there. The Eiffel Tower is still there.
Well, like I said, nothing was impossible to be rebuilt. I mean, 600 million people died, yeah, but there's still billions more left. And that meant there was, things could be repaired, rebuilt, and in 100 years, you wouldn't really see all the devastation that you saw in the beginning of it. I mean, World War II showed us that. Look at all the things that were blown up, and they're still, and today it's practically gone. Now, I mean, everything's there, and it's just, you wouldn't even know.
Right, like I said, I remember when I was younger, I don't know if you remember this, they had this little Christmas show about Germany, and it's dated because it was made during the Iron Curtain era, but it was hosted by Loretta Swit from MASH,
yep.
And she went to all these little places in Germany that she enjoyed that had a Christmassy flavor, and over again, she kept saying that this church or this community room or this home was reconstructed after World War II.
Yeah.
She kept restating it over and over again. So I guess if you look at that, perhaps after World War III, they reconstructed a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe some of London was destroyed and they rebuilt it.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe the Eiffel Tower was destroyed and they rebuilt that. Who knows? Maybe the Golden Gate Bridge was destroyed and they rebuilt it. I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
Although San Francisco doesn't look all that different. It looks like there's been some updates, but
yeah.
Remember they showed it in that alternate reality Harry Kim went into?
Yeah, but the thing of it is they didn't. Not every city was destroyed. I mean, because like you said, a lot of the cities were destroyed, but not all of them.
Was it 600 million? They said Riker said died.
Yeah, 600 million.
Right. In terms of world population, that isn't exactly the whole world.
No, I mean you got 8 billion, 9 billion people on the planet. I mean that's just a small chunk of what.
Yeah, that's like maybe half a continent.
Yeah.
That's not really that much in the long and short of things.
Yeah.
Humanity obviously did survive it. They, I imagine there were still some recognizable things because, I mean, I'm sure if you look hard enough on Earth in that time, you'll find relics of it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you got to think, it's like 200 or 300 years by the time Kirk comes along.
Yeah.
Time of new construction.
And then when you got all that new technology advancing along with it, I mean, you got new...
Right, and imagine that if they found a way to get rid of the radiation, then your problem's pretty much solved.
Yeah.
If you get rid of the radiation, then you just matter rebuilding.
Yeah.
So,
that always reminded me, remember when they had that big Gulf spill there, and it was Kevin Costner, he had some device that he created to take and separate oil from the water. Remember, he had some. It was a small.
Oh, it was a BP spill in Florida. You mean?
No, remember when that oil rig exploded and the Gulf, and then all that oil from the well was everywhere. The Gulf spill.
Oh, what? No, you mean not the BP one in 2010?
Yeah. And
yeah, that was BP one. Yeah.
And everybody was worried about, oh my God, all that oil and everything, and the fishermen were mad because they were going to lose their businesses and stuff because the fish would be poisoned. Then Kevin Costner showed up down there and he said he had a device that he wanted to try that separated oil from the water. And
I haven't heard about that. Did it work?
I don't know. He was using it, and then people for some reason what he was trying to do was get people to buy the system and create it on a board.
Well, that's not scientifically unsound. I mean, the water oil density is very different.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be particularly difficult.
Yeah, and so you had a guy that was actually taking a Star Trek initiative, if you want to say it, of trying to have a solution created for a problem that everybody was thinking was a lost.
Remember I mentioned that fungus that could feed off radiation?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was conspiracy theory, but they are studying it. So I thought to myself, I don't think radiation treatments are out of the realm of possibility at all.
No, we're getting closer to that every day.
So, I mean, if by that point, if we had it, maybe a nuclear conflict wouldn't have meant that much. Just a cleanup. Because, in Star Trek, whenever they have a radiation, is that apparently, in the 24th century, there are still probes that have radioactive elements.
Yeah.
But, I don't know why they use them, but they have them. So what they do is they have radiation protocols.
Yeah.
So in the 24th century, radiation exposure is not per se a death sentence.
No, it isn't.
Because remember when they had that plasma fire in The Next Generation? And now, in our society, that would have been like a Chernobyl-worthy thing.
Yeah.
But with theirs, like, maybe they could just take a hypospray or something and, it's all gone. But we shouldn't be exposed for too long, because I suppose if you weren't exposed to it without the proper treatment, you could still kill you.
Yeah.
But there are ways to deal with it. So
there's some decontamination thing that you can go through, and then you're clear of it. So, I mean,
And I mean, it always pleasures me to think. I remember that Zephram Cochrane story that I was telling you about, I was writing, fanfic?
Yeah.
One thing I did have in that was about the radiation protocol. I had this, because I wrote that book, and I wrote the book, you know how some stories begin at an ending and start afterward from the beginning? Like, they start later and they go back.
Yeah.
I had this story starting with Zephram Cochrane. Remember how he went into space on the spaceship?
Yeah.
I had him getting ready to go on that. It was like his hundreds. And I had this, I don't know why I put it in there. I had him taking off from the Ukraine.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a cool idea. I had him taking off from a city called New Pripyat. I wanted to have this idea that after World War III, one of the first places they restored was Chernobyl, just out of consideration. And that became like a big port for experimental spaceships or whatever. And he took off from this area of the Ukraine.
Yeah.
I just thought, it would be kind of cool to put that in there to kind of be like, yeah, even they could solve the Chernobyl problem.
Yeah.
So that's how Star Trek inspired about World War III, that, yes, we'll conquer cancer. Yes, we'll conquer AIDS. I mean, think about it. Have you ever heard anybody in the Star Trek universe dying of cancer?
Nope, that's not that I know of. I mean, they got new ailments. We know that, there's other things that people...
Alien stuff. Now, just to mention this, the cold thing is a little weird. Because Bones said he couldn't cure a cold.
Yeah.
Ben Wesley said colds were a disease people used to get.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Was that just Bones making up an old colloquialism, or did sometime between the 23rd and 24th century they cured the common cold?
I don't know. I think some people find it, it kind of neat to put that in there and say, even in the future we're still fighting the common cold. It's like another tie to humanity, that there's some things we just...
Well, I don't know if we mentioned this per se, but remember that the times of Star Trek specifically references money?
Yeah. Like
that bizarre line in Aaron DeMercer where Kirk says Starfleet's invested a lot of money in this project.
Yeah.
But then they're still building the universe, so I don't know. It's weird. Like I said, we understand the Ferengi use money. The Klingons apparently, I guess the Klingons do use some sort of currency.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
We know that the Cardassians do. The Jorans, I don't know, but like I said, I don't know. I mean, Cisco spoke of transporter credits.
Yeah, they keep saying credits, but they don't explain what that really means. Federation credits or something like that.
Or it could just be like an academy allowance, like people who are students. We want to make sure they understand self-discipline.
Well, the thing is, if you got people visiting other worlds and they're using an economy like what we have now, and in the future they're not using that, how are they going to be able to buy anything that they see there? What are they going to do? I mean, they're not going to barter with you because they want money. So it's like you can't expect everybody to have the same economic system that you have. I don't know. It's just when they say Federation credit, they don't really explain how that works. And
yeah, it's kind of random, I guess.
Yeah, they need to do more with that, I guess, to explain it. But
well, anyway, I guess when we talk about World War III, it ends up being a long historical odyssey that goes on for hours and hours about how the whole Star Trek universe ends up working, because that's the causal factor.
Yeah, I wonder how many people were still watching.
You mean like if Star Trek existed in Star Trek?
Well, hey, 3.5 hours there, I guess.
Oh, yeah, the podcast. Well,
Yeah.
to be honest, I've been on YouTube. I've seen podcasts, especially live ones that go on for many hours, like 7, 8 hours, some of them. But not with two people. They'll have people interchanging in and out.
7, 8 hours, holy.
I mean, they have blocks of things.
That's like a whole work day.
But like I said, these are big subjects, so,
I guess, God, that's a lot of watching there. I mean, you got to run that all day long.
Well, anyway, to give people a little rest here, to give ourselves some rest, because I know that was one of the things you were talking to me about earlier.
Yeah.
In your case, we've discussed the Third World War in Star Trek, the events, speculation, and the massive, massive, massive levels of ramifications that came out of that. So, I'm hoping next time, I'm really hoping that we'll get Steward Captain Foley on here for our joint podcast, which we were supposed to do, but we didn't get a chance to. But I'm hoping that happens next time, because that's kind of our big destination. I'm considering it like, before we go, remember that time the Enterprise did this whole first season arc where the whole purpose of the mission was to get to Risa?
Yeah.
Like a planet that shouldn't even be in their reach, and their whole goal is just to get there.
Yeah.
It's like one episode, and the whole goal is this planet that shouldn't be anywhere near them.
We were looking at months of high warp speed to get there, for one thing.
Maybe they should have gone to Ripley's Pleasure Planet. Maybe it was closer. I don't know. But anyway, that's our goal. So, if we don't do it next time, that's cool. But we at least did World War III. One big, and there's other rabbit holes. We got the circuits out of the way. That was a rabbit hole. This is a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
When we do our bios, the Zephram Cochrane thing could be a bit of a rabbit hole, but we'll learn to condense these rabbit holes, I'm sure, in time. We started out condensed, and we ended up being big. So maybe we'll go back a little bit on that. I don't know. But anyway, I hope this conversation was enlightening. I hope your original point kind of came to some fruition or transmuted itself somehow.
Yeah.
Because you were asking some questions, and I'm hoping that this kind of puts some things together for the questions that you answered.
Okay.
I hope so. I mean, but like I said, maybe it'll get people. Maybe this video will get people asking those same questions rather than looking at. You got to wonder. You be on social media. You hear all these people. Oh, this and that person did something bad. Oh, the world is doomed. Maybe they think that because they're watching all this dystopian sci-fi, and that's all they know.
Yeah.
Maybe if they think of Star Trek and think of things like this, they can look at it in a broader sense. That this is a bad time we're going through now, and that we'll survive it like we have every other.
Yep.
So, we managed to do a serious-minded topic with plenty of laughter. I'm happy we did that. I'm happy about that. I mean, that's why I inserted the circuit thing, because that always is good for a chuckle. So, anyway, we'll see you next week, hopefully with Captain Foley. If not, we'll see you next week.
All right.
Long and prosper, everybody, and have a great week.